There is a version of the heavenly world that most of us never encounter. It lives not in the stained glass of old cathedrals, not in the soft golden light of Renaissance paintings, and not in the gentle imagery of greeting cards and children's picture books. It lives instead in the oldest pages of Scripture, written down by men who were, by their own account, trembling when they wrote. What they described was not comforting. It was not familiar. It was something else entirely. Tonight, we begin at the very foundation. Before the monsters of the deep, before the giants who walked the ancient earth, before the wars fought in unseen dimensions, there is the architecture itself, the structure of the heavens, the court of the divine, and the beings, ancient beyond reckoning, who inhabit it. To understand the supernatural world of the Bible, we first have to let go of what we think we already know. We have to set aside centuries of art and tradition and interpretation, and return to the original texts, to the raw, unfiltered accounts of the prophets, the poets, and the mystics who glimpsed something vast and tried, with the limited tools of human language, to describe what they saw. What they left behind is extraordinary. The Bible, read carefully and in full, does not describe a simple heaven populated by winged humans in white robes floating on clouds. It describes something far more complex, far more layered, and in many ways far more strange. It describes a cosmos that is alive, structured, hierarchical, and teeming with intelligences that bear very little resemblance to the beings we have been taught to imagine. We begin, as the scriptures themselves seem to suggest we should, with the court. Among scholars of the ancient Near East, there is a concept that appears throughout the Hebrew Bible with remarkable consistency. It is called the Divine Council. The idea is present in many of the oldest layers of Scripture, and it describes something that can, at first, feel surprising to modern readers: the image of God not as a solitary sovereign in an empty heaven, but as a king presiding over a court. A gathering of celestial beings, lesser in power and authority, but divine in their own right, assembled in a kind of cosmic parliament. Psalm 82 is one of the most striking examples. In it, God stands in what the text calls the divine assembly, and he judges among the gods. The Hebrew word used here is Elohim, the same word used for God himself elsewhere in Scripture. The text does not shy away from this language. These are divine beings, celestial intelligences of significant stature, and they are being held to account. God rebukes them for their failures, for defending the unjust, for showing partiality to the wicked. And he renders judgment. This image, God as the supreme authority in a structured hierarchy of divine beings, runs quietly through much of the Hebrew Bible. It surfaces in the book of Job, where the sons of God gather before the Lord and the accuser moves among them. It appears in the imagery of the heavenly throne room in Isaiah, in Ezekiel, in Daniel. The heavens, as the ancient writers understood them, were not empty. They were populated, ordered, governed, and the beings who populated them were nothing like what later tradition would imagine. One of the most pervasive misconceptions about biblical angels is one that most people carry without ever questioning it. Ask someone to picture an angel, and they will almost certainly imagine a person, usually a beautiful one, with large feathered wings and a soft, glowing circle of light above their head. This image is so deeply embedded in Western culture that it feels ancient, feels scriptural, feels as though it must have come from the Bible itself. It did not. The halo, that luminous ring that has come to define angelic imagery in Western art, appears nowhere in the biblical text. Not once. It is a later artistic convention, borrowed in part from earlier traditions, adopted by early Christian artists as a visual shorthand for holiness, and then applied so consistently across so many centuries of painting and sculpture that it came to feel like truth. But in the actual pages of Scripture, no angel is ever described with a halo. The concept simply does not exist there. The same is true of one of the other most beloved images in all of religious art. The small, chubby, rosy-cheeked infant with tiny wings, the figure known to art historians as a puto, familiar from the corners of Raphael's paintings and the ceilings of Baroque churches, bears absolutely no relationship to the angels of the Bible. These cherubic infants, so gentle and decorative, emerged from a blending of classical artistic traditions with religious iconography during the Renaissance. They are charming. They are culturally significant. But they are, in terms of biblical accuracy, a complete fiction. The angels of Scripture are something else entirely. Again and again, across both the Old and New Testaments, when an angel appears to a human being, the response of that human being is not delight. It is not wonder. It is not the warm, reassured feeling one might expect from encountering a soft-winged infant floating in golden light. The response, almost universally, is terror. People fall to the ground. They cover their faces. They believe they are about to die. The shepherds in the fields outside Bethlehem are described as being filled with great fear when the angel appears. The prophet Ezekiel, on multiple occasions, falls face down when confronted with heavenly visions. Daniel, one of the most spiritually courageous figures in all of Scripture, collapses and loses consciousness. Even John, the author of Revelation, the man who walked beside Jesus, falls at the feet of the angel he encounters as though he were dead. This is the consistent pattern. And it is so consistent, so repeated throughout the text, that the angels themselves seem to have developed a kind of standard protocol for managing it. Almost every angelic encounter in the Bible begins with the same words. Do not be afraid. Fear not. Do not be frightened. The greeting comes first, before any message is delivered, because without it, the human recipient is too overwhelmed to hear anything else. This tells us something important. These beings, whatever they look like, whatever they are, generate in the humans who encounter them a visceral, overwhelming, physiological response of terror. Not unease. Not mild surprise. Something closer to the response of a small creature that has just encountered something enormously, incomprehensibly powerful and cannot process it. The Bible, to its credit, does attempt to describe what some of these beings actually look like. And the descriptions it provides are among the most astonishing passages in all of literature. We begin with the seraphim. These beings appear explicitly by name in only one place in the entire Bible, the 6th chapter of the book of Isaiah, in a vision that the prophet receives of the heavenly throne room. The name itself is telling. Seraphim, in Hebrew, means the burning ones, or sometimes the fiery serpents. This is not a gentle name. It is a name that carries heat and light and something ancient and dangerous. Isaiah describes them as standing above the divine throne, and each one has 6 wings. The distribution of those wings is specific and, when you sit with it, deeply strange. 2 wings cover the face of the seraph. 2 wings cover what the text calls the feet, a term that in biblical Hebrew is sometimes a euphemism, suggesting perhaps a form too overwhelming or too sacred to be fully described. And 2 wings are used for flight. 4 of the 6 wings, then, are not for flying. They are for covering, for concealment. Even these beings of immense celestial power, standing in the direct presence of God, veil themselves. They do not look fully upon the divine. They cover themselves with their own wings in an act of, perhaps, reverence, or perhaps protection. They call to one another in what Isaiah hears as a thunderous voice, shaking the very thresholds of the heavenly temple with their cry. Holy, "Holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." If the seraphim are the burning ones, the cherubim are something older still. They are the first angels to appear in the biblical narrative, arriving in the 3rd chapter of Genesis, positioned at the east of the Garden of Eden after the expulsion of Adam and Eve. Their purpose is stated plainly: to guard the way to the tree of life, accompanied by a flaming sword that turns in every direction. This is the cherubim's introduction in Scripture, not as gentle attendants, but as guardians. Sentinels. Armed celestial soldiers posted at the boundary between the lost paradise and the world outside it. Their role as guardians would persist throughout the Bible. When God gave Moses the instructions for building the Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred object in all of Israelite religion, the design was specific. 2 golden cherubim were to be hammered from pure gold and placed on the lid of the ark, which was called the mercy seat. Their wings were to stretch upward and outward, meeting in the middle above the lid, forming a canopy. And it was there, in the space between the wings of the cherubim, that God said he would meet with Moses. That was the point of contact, the threshold between the human and the divine, framed by the wings of these beings. But it is the prophet Ezekiel who gives us the most detailed, most bewildering description of what the cherubim actually look like, and it is here that the text begins to move into territory that genuinely strains the capacity of human language. Ezekiel was a priest living among the exiles in Babylon. He was not a man given to casual visions. What he describes in the 1st chapter of his book is something that arrived with the force of a storm, a great cloud coming from the north, surrounded by flashing lightning, with a brilliant light around it, and fire. And out of the fire came the living creatures. Each of the 4 creatures he describes, which he will later identify explicitly as cherubim, has 4 faces. Not a single face capable of looking in multiple directions, but 4 distinct faces simultaneously present on a single being: the face of a human, the face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left, and the face of an eagle at the back. They have 4 wings. 2 wings spread upward, touching the wings of the creature beside them. 2 wings cover their bodies. But Ezekiel adds something more. Beneath their wings, these beings have what appear to be human hands. And across their entire bodies, their backs, their wings, everything that can be seen, they are covered in eyes. Let that image settle for a moment. 4-faced beings, burning like coals, moving with the speed of lightning, their entire forms covered in watching eyes, hands visible beneath their wings, moving in perfect unison without turning, because they can face all 4 directions at once. These are the cherubim. Not the soft-cheeked infants of Renaissance painting. Not the gentle guardian angels of popular imagination. These are the beings placed at the threshold of the divine, the guards of sacred space, the attendants of the heavenly throne. And they are not alone in Ezekiel's vision. Alongside the cherubim, the prophet describes something that exists in a category entirely its own: the Aphanim. The name means wheels, and the name is, for once, exactly accurate. What Ezekiel sees beside the living creatures are wheels. Massive ones. Each wheel appears to intersect with another wheel at a perpendicular angle, forming a structure that has led many readers, over the centuries, to reach for the image of a gyroscope, 2 rings crossing each other, capable of moving in any direction without reorienting. The wheels gleam like chrysolite, a yellow-green gemstone, and the overall impression is one of enormous, structured luminosity. But the wheels are high. Ezekiel emphasizes this. They are incredibly tall, and they are, like the cherubim themselves, covered in eyes. The rims of the wheels, the outer edges, are full of eyes all around, watching, in every direction, simultaneously, without ceasing. The Nephilim do not move the way physical objects move. They do not need to turn to change direction. When the cherubim move, the wheels move with them, rising when they rise, stopping when they stop, moving in whatever direction they choose, instantly, because the spirit of the living creatures, Ezekiel tells us, is within the wheels. The two orders of beings are not separate. They are connected at the level of spirit, moving as one, responding as one. What Ezekiel is describing, with all the tools available to a 6th century priest in exile, is something that seems to operate entirely outside the normal constraints of physical space. The Nephilim do not occupy a fixed orientation. They do not have a front and a back. They are complete in every direction at once. They move like lightning. They are covered in eyes that see everything. The rational mind reaches for explanations. Ancient astronaut theorists have reached for this passage for decades, seeing in it a description of advanced technology, of spacecraft and mechanical systems. Theologians reach for it too, seeing the omnidirectional eyes as symbols of divine omniscience, the wheels as symbols of God's providential movement through history. Whatever framework one brings to the passage, the underlying strangeness remains. These are among the oldest, most senior, most intimately connected beings in the heavenly hierarchy. And their appearance was, for the prophet who witnessed them, so overwhelming, so completely unlike anything the human mind was equipped to categorize, that he spent multiple chapters of his book attempting to describe it, and in the end could only fall on his face. There is one final image from this opening survey of the heavenly world, quieter than the rest, stranger in its own way. In the 5th chapter of Zechariah, the prophet receives a vision of a woman in a basket being carried through the sky. And the beings carrying it are described as two women, possessed of wings like the wings of a stork. This brief, almost incidental passage has fascinated scholars for centuries, because it represents one of the very few places in the entire Bible where a supernatural being is described in overtly female terms. Throughout Scripture, angels are almost universally referred to with male pronouns and appear in male form when they take on human appearance. The women of Zechariah's vision are different. Whether they represent angelic beings or some other class of supernatural entity is debated. The text offers no explanation, no identification, no further elaboration. They appear, they carry their cargo, and the vision moves on. Scripture, so often, does this. It offers a glimpse of something enormous and strange and entirely outside the familiar categories of human experience, and then it moves on. As though the writers themselves knew that some things could only be glimpsed, not held. As though the architecture of the heavens was simply too vast, too layered, too alive with presences beyond counting, to be captured in any single account. What we have are fragments. Visions received in moments of crisis, or prayer, or exile. Descriptions written down by men who knew they were describing something real and who also knew that their words would fall short. What they left behind is a picture of the heavens that is, in every meaningful sense, nothing like the world we were told to imagine. It is older. It is stranger. It is more structured, and more wild, and more populated with intelligences we do not have names for, than almost any tradition has fully reckoned with. And we have only just begun. The heavens, as we have begun to understand them, are not a simple place. They are layered, structured, populated by orders of beings that seem to operate on principles entirely foreign to human experience. But within that vast and complex architecture, there is something that functions like an inner circle. A council within the council. A tier of beings who stand closest to the center of divine authority, and who carry out its most significant mandates. These are the archangels. The book of Revelation, in one of its quieter moments amid all of its overwhelming imagery, makes a reference that has anchored angelic theology for centuries. It speaks of 7 angels who stand before God. Not angels in general. Not the innumerable host that other passages describe filling the heavens beyond counting. 7 specific angels, identified by their position, they stand before God. In the cosmology of the ancient Near East, to stand before a king was to be a member of his innermost court, his most trusted advisors, his personal emissaries. These 7, whatever their individual roles, occupy the most intimate position in the divine hierarchy that the text describes. Tradition, drawing on both canonical scripture and the broader body of Jewish and early Christian writing, has long identified these 7 as the archangels. And yet, when you go looking for them by that title in the pages of the Bible itself, you find something surprising. The word archangel, in the canonical Protestant scriptures, appears almost nowhere. It appears, with specific reference to a named angel, exactly once. In the brief letter of Jude, a single verse refers to Michael the archangel. That is it. Of all the beings who populate the angelic hierarchy, of all the named celestial figures who appear throughout the length of the biblical narrative, only one is explicitly, formally given the title in the core canonical text. Michael. He appears across multiple books of scripture, and his character, if that is the right word for an angelic being, is remarkably consistent throughout. He is a warrior, a defender, a military commander of the celestial host. In the book of Daniel, he is described as the great prince who stands watch over the people of Israel, a being of such stature that his involvement in cosmic conflict is described almost matter-of-factly. In Revelation, it is Michael who leads the heavenly armies against the forces of the adversary in the great celestial war that the text describes. In Jude, he is involved in a confrontation over the body of Moses, a dispute with the adversary that he handles not with his own power but with the authority of divine command. Michael, in every account, is a being of action. Not a messenger, not a counselor, but a fighter. A guardian. The one who is sent when the task requires force. Gabriel is something different. Gabriel appears in Daniel, twice, arriving to interpret visions that the prophet cannot understand on his own. He appears in the opening chapter of Luke, announcing the coming birth of John the Baptist to the elderly priest Zechariah, and then, a few verses later, delivering perhaps the most significant message in the entire New Testament to a young woman in Nazareth. In every appearance, Gabriel's function is the same: communication, interpretation, delivery of divine intelligence to human recipients. And yet, for all his prominence, Gabriel is never once called an archangel in the biblical text. What he is called, in the Gospel of Luke, is something perhaps even more telling. When he introduces himself to Zechariah, he says, "I am Gabriel, who stands in the presence of God." That phrase, "who stands in the presence of God," is a statement of position. It places him, like the 7 of Revelation, in that innermost court. He is not merely an angel dispatched on an errand. He is one who dwells, perpetually, in the throne room itself, and who is sent directly from that presence when the message to be delivered is important enough. The absence of the archangel title in Gabriel's case is one of those small textual details that rewards attention. The title matters less than the position, and the position could not be more central. Raphael occupies a different space in the canon entirely. He does not appear in the Protestant Bible at all. He lives in the Book of Tobit, a text considered canonical by Catholic and Orthodox Christians and deuterocanonical or apocryphal by Protestant traditions. Whatever one makes of that distinction, the portrait of Raphael in Tobit is one of the most complete and, in its own way, most human portraits of an archangel anywhere in ancient literature. In Tobit, Raphael travels disguised as a human companion to a young man named Tobias on a long journey, guiding him, protecting him, instructing him in the use of materials that will ultimately heal his blind father and deliver a woman tormented by a demon. The demon in question, a being named Asmodeus, has killed 7 successive husbands on their wedding nights. It is Raphael who provides the means to repel him, and who, in a detail that feels almost procedural in its matter-of-factness, binds Asmodeus and casts him into the desert of Upper Egypt. When the journey is complete and Raphael finally reveals his true identity to the family, his words are worth sitting with. He tells them that he is one of the 7 angels who stand before the glory of God. There it is again. The same inner court. The same intimate proximity to the divine center. And he adds that when Tobias and his father prayed, he was the one who brought those prayers before God. He was not merely a supernatural companion for the road. He was, the whole time, an intercessor of the highest order, moving between the human and the divine as naturally as breathing. Raphael's name means, in Hebrew, God heals. It is a name that fits him precisely. The fourth of the commonly named archangels, Uriel, is the most elusive in terms of canonical scripture. His primary home is in the texts that exist at the edges of the biblical canon, the Book of Enoch, ancient and expansive and strange, and the deuterocanonical text known as 2 Esdras. In these writings, Uriel's domain is described in terms that feel almost astronomical. He is associated with the stars, with the movements of celestial bodies, with what one might call the mechanics of the cosmos. He is the being who, in Enoch, shows the patriarch the laws governing the sun and moon, the chambers where the winds are kept, and the structure of the heavens themselves. His name means, in Hebrew, God is my light, or the fire of God, and his association with celestial illumination, with the ordered movement of light through the universe, runs consistently through every text in which he appears. What emerges from these 4 figures, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, is a picture of an inner circle with distinct and complementary functions. The warrior, the messenger, the healer, the illuminator. Different faces of divine engagement with the created order, each concentrated in a being of enormous power and ancient purpose. But the archangels and the burning ones and the wheels are not the only inhabitants of the heavenly hierarchy. Running alongside them, mentioned almost in passing in the pages of Daniel, is another class of beings whose role is different from all the others. They are called the Watchers. The name, in Aramaic Irin, means, simply, those who are awake. Those who watch. In the book of Daniel, they appear in a dream received by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, a vision of a great tree being cut down at the decree of a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven. Their function in this context is judicial. They carry decrees. They execute divine judgments on earthly rulers. They are not messengers bringing comfort, and they are not warriors fighting battles. They are sentinels, observers, the celestial agents of divine accountability over the affairs of human kingdoms. The Watchers will return later in our account in a very different and far more troubling context. The same class of being that carries divine decrees in Daniel becomes, in the book of Enoch and in the cryptic verses of Genesis 6, the center of one of the most dramatic and far-reaching stories in all of ancient tradition. But that comes later. For now, they are what Daniel shows them to be, ancient, awake, watching from heights we cannot see, carrying authority over the rise and fall of earthly power. Among all the angelic figures of the Old Testament, there is one who has generated more theological debate, more sustained scholarly discussion, and more genuine uncertainty than any other. He is never given a name. He is called simply the angel of the Lord. He appears throughout the Hebrew scriptures with remarkable frequency, and what makes him extraordinary is not his power or his appearance but the way the text treats his speech. Again and again, the angel of the Lord begins by being described in the third person, as a distinct being separate from God, and then, mid-narrative, the text shifts, and he begins to speak in the first person as God himself. Not relaying a message from God. Not speaking on behalf of God. Speaking as God, using the divine first person, making covenants and pronouncements that are unambiguously divine in their authority and scope. At the burning bush, it is the angel of the Lord who appears in the flame. But then God speaks from the bush. The transition is seamless in the text, as though the distinction between the angel and the one who sent him has collapsed entirely. When the angel appears to Hagar in the wilderness, to Abraham on the mountain, to Gideon, and to Manoah, the same pattern repeats. The being is identified as an angel, and then speaks and acts as God. Theologians across centuries have wrestled with this figure. For many in the Christian tradition, the angel of the Lord represents what is called a Christophany, a pre-incarnate appearance of the second person of the Trinity, the divine Son appearing in visible form before the incarnation in Bethlehem. This interpretation is not universally accepted, but it is taken seriously by scholars of significant standing, and it is easy to understand why. The figure simply does not behave like any other angel in Scripture. He carries an authority that the text does not assign to Michael or Gabriel or any of the named archangels. He does not say, "Thus says the Lord." He says, "I am." Whatever he is in a category of his own. There is a story in the book of Genesis that has fascinated readers for as long as the text has existed, and it is a story that seems, on the surface, almost too physical to be supernatural. The patriarch Jacob is alone at night beside the ford of a river called Jabbok. He is anxious, afraid, facing a reunion with a brother he wronged and has not seen in decades. And out of the darkness, a man comes to him, and they wrestle. They wrestle through the entire night. This is not a metaphor, or at least the text does not present it as one. It is a physical contest, a struggle in the dark, two figures grappling on the ground beside a river, and neither one of them can overcome the other. As dawn begins to approach, the mysterious figure does something that, in the context of a human wrestling match, would make no sense at all. He touches the socket of Jacob's hip, and the hip is wrenched, dislocated, with a single touch in the middle of this prolonged physical struggle that has not broken Jacob's grip. Jacob, injured and exhausted but still holding on, refuses to let the being go unless it blesses him. The blessing is given. The being asks Jacob his name, and then gives him a new one, Israel, meaning one who struggles with God, or one who has prevailed with God. And then he is gone, with the sunrise, without ever having given his own name. Jacob, standing in the daylight with a limp that will remain with him for the rest of his life, says that he has seen God face to face and survived. He names the place Peniel, which means the face of God. What took place at the Jabbok is one of those passages that resists neat explanation. The text is not allegorical in its tone. It describes something that happened in physical space to a physical man whose body bore the physical evidence of it for the remainder of his life. Whether the being was an angel in the classical sense, a manifestation of the divine, or something in between, the encounter was real, its effects were permanent, and its significance rippled through the entire subsequent history of Israel in the name of a people born from that night of struggle. The power of individual angels in the biblical account is, when you survey it carefully, almost difficult to comprehend. We have seen already that these beings generate terror simply by appearing. But the texts also describe specific acts of angelic power that give some concrete sense of what that power actually means in practical terms. The prophet Elisha, during a period of conflict with the kingdom of Aram, found himself and his servants surrounded by an enemy force that had come specifically to capture him. The servant, seeing the army encircling the city, was understandably alarmed. Elisha, calm in a way that must have seemed incomprehensible, prayed a simple prayer, "Open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see." And the servant's eyes were opened. The text says that the hills around the city were full of horses and chariots of fire. Not metaphorical ones. Horses and chariots of fire, an angelic army of such size and power that it completely surrounded and outnumbered the earthly force that had seemed so threatening a moment before. The supernatural army was already there. It had been there all along. The servant simply could not see it. This passage suggests something about the relationship between the heavenly and the earthly that runs quietly through many parts of Scripture, that the angelic host is not distant, not removed to some far celestial realm, but present, close, occupying the same spaces as human events, visible only when the capacity to see is granted. The military dimension of angelic power is perhaps most starkly illustrated in a single episode from the reign of the Judean king Hezekiah. Jerusalem was under siege by the Assyrian army, one of the most powerful military forces in the ancient world, commanded by a king named Sennacherib who had already devastated cities throughout the region and who had every reason to expect that Jerusalem would fall. Hezekiah prayed. Isaiah the prophet delivered a divine response. And that night, a single angel went out. One angel. The text of 2 Kings 19 reports the outcome with a brevity that is almost more striking than any elaborate description could be. When morning came, there were 185,000 dead Assyrian soldiers in the camp. The army that had been the terror of the ancient Near East was gone. Sennacherib withdrew, returned to Nineveh, and was eventually killed by his own sons. The angel involved in this event is associated in tradition with a title that appears elsewhere in Scripture, the Destroyer, or in Hebrew, the Mash-Hit. This being, or this function, appears in one of the earliest and most dramatic episodes in all of the Hebrew Bible, the 10th plague of Egypt. The Passover narrative is one of the most familiar in all of religious tradition. But the supernatural agent at its center, the force that passed through Egypt on that night and struck down the firstborn of every Egyptian household, is often discussed in ways that soften or abstract it. The text does not soften it. It describes a force moving through the land with lethal purpose, precise in its targeting, unstoppable in its power, held back only by the mark on the doorposts of the houses it was instructed to pass over. In later Jewish tradition, this force was given a name and a more defined identity, the Mash-Hit, the Destroyer, a being or an expression of divine power specifically associated with the execution of divine judgment at its most absolute. Whether this is the same being as the angel of 2 Kings, whether there is one destroyer or many, whether the Mash-Hit is a distinct entity or simply a description of what any member of the angelic host becomes when carrying a mandate of destruction, these are questions the texts do not fully answer. What the texts do establish, with remarkable consistency across multiple books and centuries of writing, is a picture of the angelic host that is nothing like what most of us were taught to imagine. These are not gentle presences. They are not primarily comforters, though comfort is something they occasionally bring. They are agents of a power that is, by any human scale of measurement, absolute. They move through history at the direction of a divine authority, and when they move with purpose, the results are felt by nations. They guard. They watch. They wrestle. They deliver messages that change the course of human lives. They stand in thrones' rooms of fire and carry decrees that topple kings. They surround cities in armies of flame that human eyes cannot see. And when they are sent to act, they act with a completeness that leaves no doubt about what has happened. The hierarchy of the heavens is not merely a theological concept. In the world of the biblical text, it is a living reality, pressing against the edges of the human world at every moment, breaking through in ways that the men and women who experienced it spent the rest of their lives trying to describe. We have met the court. We have met the inner council, the warriors and messengers and healers and sentinels. We have seen the edges of what they are capable of. Now we turn to the darker half of the story. Because the architecture of the heavens, as the Bible tells it, did not remain intact. Something broke. Something fell. And from that falling, an entirely different order of beings entered the world, beings whose influence would ripple through the biblical narrative in ways that are, even now, not fully reckoned with. The next chapter of this account belongs to them. The story of the heavens, as we have followed it so far, is one of order, of hierarchy and purpose, of beings created for specific roles and occupying specific positions within a vast, structured cosmos. The divine council with its assembled intelligences, the archangels with their distinct and complementary functions, the cherubim at their thresholds, the seraphim at their posts, the Aphanim turning endlessly in their gyroscopic orbits of watchful fire. Everything in its place. Everything oriented toward a center. But the biblical narrative does not remain a story of order. At some point, before the human drama of Genesis fully begins, something in that architecture shifted. A crack appeared. And from that crack came everything that follows in the darker half of the biblical supernatural world. To understand the rebellion, we have to start with a name. Or rather, we have to start with the complicated truth about a name that most people think they already understand. Lucifer. The word appears in the King James Version of the Bible exactly once. It occurs in the 14th chapter of Isaiah, in a passage of extraordinary poetic force. How you have fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. The name has accrued, over 2 millennia of Christian tradition, an enormous weight of meaning. It has become synonymous with the devil, with Satan, with the adversary of God and humanity. It has generated art and literature and theology in quantities that dwarf almost any other single word in religious history. And yet the word itself, in the original Hebrew, is Helel. It means, simply, day star, or son of the dawn. It is a reference to the planet Venus, the brightest object in the pre-dawn sky, which rises brilliantly before sunrise and then is swallowed by the light of the sun as it rises. The image Isaiah is reaching for is one of something that blazed with extraordinary brightness and then was extinguished by a greater light, something that believed its own brilliance made it supreme, and discovered otherwise. The name Lucifer is a Latin translation, carried into English through the King James Version, of a Hebrew astronomical metaphor. This does not make the passage any less theologically significant, and it does not resolve the debate about exactly who or what Isaiah is describing. The passage is addressed on its surface to the king of Babylon, a human ruler of towering arrogance, but the language quickly exceeds anything applicable to a human being. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens, I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will make myself like the Most High. No earthly king, however powerful, raises his throne above the stars of God. The tradition of reading this passage as a description of a primordial celestial fall, of a being of great and original brilliance who attempted to elevate himself to divine status and was cast down, is ancient and deeply rooted. What the text itself is careful not to do is provide the tidy narrative that centuries of tradition have built around it. The Bible, characteristically, offers a glimpse, a fragment. an image of a falling star and a throne that was never seized. The other name we need to examine carefully is one that is more pervasive throughout the biblical text and equally misunderstood: Satan. Most readers encounter Satan as a personal name, the name of a specific supernatural being who is the enemy of God and humanity, the tempter, the accuser, the father of lies. And that is, ultimately, what the figure becomes across the arc of the biblical narrative. But the word itself, in its original Hebrew form, is not a name at all. It is a title. Ha-Satan, the adversary, or more precisely, the accuser. In the legal traditions of the ancient Near East, the role of the Satan was a recognized function, the one who stands in opposition, who brings charges, who tests the validity of a claim or the integrity of a person. It is a prosecutorial role. And in the earliest appearances of this figure in the Hebrew Bible, that is precisely what he does. He operates within the divine court, within the very structure of the celestial hierarchy we have been tracing, as a kind of heavenly prosecutor. In the book of Job, the Ha-Satan appears among the sons of God when they present themselves before the Lord. He has been roaming through the earth, he says, going back and forth on it. His function in the narrative is to challenge God's assessment of Job's righteousness. He is not yet cast out. He is not yet the adversary of all creation. He is, in this text, a member of the celestial court, operating within its structure, pressing a legal argument. The book of Zechariah gives us another courtroom scene. The high priest Joshua stands before the angel of the Lord, clothed in filthy garments, representing the contaminated and diminished state of the people he serves. And standing at his right hand, in the precise position that an accuser would occupy in an ancient legal proceeding, is the Satan, actively pressing charges against him before the divine court. The angel of the Lord rebukes the accuser, Joshua's filthy garments are replaced with clean ones, and the accusation fails. But the image is striking. This being operates in close proximity to the divine, within the formal structures of heavenly jurisprudence, presenting his case according to the recognized procedures of celestial law. The transition from this figure, the prosecutorial adversary who works within the system, to the being described in the New Testament and in Revelation, the dragon, the deceiver, the enemy of the cosmos, is one of the great narrative arcs of the entire Bible. And its most vivid expression appears in the 12th chapter of Revelation, in a vision of a kind that sets even the extraordinary imagery of that book apart. John sees a great sign in the heaven, an enormous dragon, fiery red, with 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon its heads. The scale of the image is almost hallucinatory. This is not a large animal. This is a cosmic entity, something vast enough that its tail, in an image of almost incomprehensible scope, sweeps 1/3 of the stars out of the sky and flings them to the earth. The dragon is explicitly identified. The text leaves no ambiguity. It is the ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the one who deceives the whole world. The 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns are the language of totality and dominion, the symbolic vocabulary of apocalyptic literature encoding something about the nature and scope of this being's claimed authority over the earthly order. And those stars swept from the sky by the dragon's tail. 1/3 of them cast to the earth. This image has been interpreted, across the breadth of biblical and theological tradition, as a symbolic representation of the primordial rebellion, the fall of the angels who aligned themselves with the adversary, who were drawn out of their ordained positions in the heavenly hierarchy and flung, with him, downward. 1/3 of the celestial host. A number that, even as a symbol, staggers the imagination. Whatever broke in the architecture of the heavens, it broke catastrophically. And the reverberations of that breaking are felt throughout the rest of the biblical narrative, in the sea monsters and the land creatures and the demonic hierarchies that fill the pages that follow. But before we descend into demonology and the dark hierarchies of fallen beings, the Bible has something else to say about the nature of the world into which all of this was released. Because the chaos that the adversary represents did not begin with his rebellion. In the cosmology of the ancient Hebrew writers, chaos was something that existed before order, and the act of creation was, in part, an act of imposing structure on a primordial wildness that never entirely disappeared. In the beginning, the first chapter of Genesis tells us, the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. The Hebrew word translated as the deep is Tehom, and it carries in it the weight of ancient Near Eastern cosmology, echoing older creation traditions in which the deep was not merely water but something more primordial, something associated with chaos and with the creatures that inhabited it. The Hebrew Bible uses a word, tannin, to describe the great creatures of that deep. The word is used to describe the sea monsters, the dragons, the great serpents that were created on the fifth day of creation, brought into being along with all the other creatures of the sea. They are not rebellious in this framing, not opposed to creation. They are part of it, among the things that God made. And yet their association with the primordial deep, with the formless chaos that preceded the ordering of the world, gives them a significance in the biblical imagination that exceeds their biological category. The great fish of the book of Jonah has generated debate for as long as the text has circulated. The Hebrew, Dag Gadol, means simply great fish, and the literal reading of the narrative is of a large marine creature that swallowed a drowning prophet and kept him alive in its belly for 3 days before depositing him on a shore. But in the context of ancient Near Eastern cosmology, where the sea itself was associated with chaos and the great creatures of the deep carried symbolic weight beyond the merely zoological, many readers in the ancient world would have heard something more in that story. The prophet swallowed by the chaos of the deep, and returned from it, preserved within the belly of the monster, and brought back to the world. It is an image that resonates, and resonates deliberately, with older and deeper symbolic currents in the tradition. But if the great fish of Jonah is at least partly ambiguous, the creatures described in Job and in the Psalms are something else entirely. They are named. They are described in detail. And their descriptions are extraordinary. Rariab is a name that appears in several books of the Hebrew Bible, and in each case it carries the same constellation of associations. Primordial, chaotic, vast. In Psalm 89 and in Job, Rariab is a creature of the deep, a symbol of the chaos that opposed the divine ordering of creation and was crushed. In Isaiah, the name is applied poetically to Egypt, used as a metaphor for a power of overwhelming arrogance and chaos that is ultimately subject to divine judgment. The association is not random. Egypt, in the biblical imagination, represents a kind of earthly Rariab, a human empire that mirrors the primordial chaos monster in its opposition to divine purpose and its ultimate inability to prevail against it. Rariab is never described in the kind of physical detail that the great creatures of Job receive. It lives in the poetic and prophetic literature as a symbol more than as a creature, a name for something the writers understood their audience would recognize: the ancient chaos, the deep disorder, the primordial opposition to order that the act of creation had subdued but not entirely eliminated. It is in the book of Job, in its final and most overwhelming section, that the Bible gives us its most extraordinary descriptions of the creatures that inhabit the edges of the world. God speaks to Job from a whirlwind, and the speech is one of the most remarkable passages in all of ancient literature, a sustained meditation on the incomprehensibility of the created order, on the vast and wild and untamable dimensions of a world that extends far beyond human understanding. And in the course of this speech, God describes two creatures that have fascinated readers ever since. The first is the behemoth. Look at Behemoth, God says to Job, which I made along with you. There is something striking in that phrase, made along with you, placing this creature in direct relationship with humanity, as though its existence and jobs are somehow connected, somehow part of the same creative act or the same cosmic argument. The behemoth eats grass like an ox. So far, this sounds recognizable, even ordinary. But the description that follows quickly exceeds the ordinary. Its strength is in its loins and its power in the muscles of its belly. And then, its tail sways like a cedar tree. A cedar. The great cedars of Lebanon that appear throughout the Hebrew Bible as symbols of towering, ancient, immovable strength. The behemoth's tail moves like one of these. Not the tail of an ox. Not the tail of any known animal. Something that sways with the weight and scale of a great tree. The bones of this creature are described as tubes of bronze. Its limbs like rods of iron. These are not the bones of a biological animal as the ancient world understood them. This is a structural description, an engineering description almost, of something built on a different principle than the creatures of ordinary experience. The behemoth is armored from the inside, its skeleton a kind of architecture of metal, its body a fortress of living bronze and iron. It lies under the lotus plants and in the cover of the reeds and the marsh, the text says, and when the river rages, it is not frightened. It is confident though the Jordan rushes against its mouth. The image is of a creature so massively, fundamentally solid that the force of a flooding river is simply not a relevant concern. Not something to be withstood. Something to be ignored. Scholars have debated the identity of the behemoth since the text was written. Hippopotamus. Elephant. Crocodile. Some commentators have argued for a creature known from natural history, enhanced by poetic exaggeration. Others have noted that the description, particularly the cedar tail and the bronze bones, does not map cleanly onto any animal the ancient world knew, and have argued for something else, a primordial creature, perhaps, existing at the same boundary between the natural and the supernatural as the great sea monsters, a being that belongs to the created order but exceeds it. Whatever it is, God describes it as the first of his great works, the prime example, the masterwork of creation's wild and untamable dimension. And then comes the Leviathan. The behemoth is described in a single chapter of Job. The Leviathan receives more. Job 41 is one of the most sustained and extraordinary passages of creature description in all of ancient literature, and it begins not with a description but with a challenge. Can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook? Can you press down its tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope through its nose or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it speak gently to you? Will it make an agreement with you? Can you make it a pet? The questions are rhetorical, and their rhetorical force is enormous. They are designed to establish, with absolute clarity, that the Leviathan is outside the category of things that human power or human cleverness can master. It is not simply large. It is not simply dangerous. It is, in the specific and precise sense the text intends, untamable. Incomprehensible to human strategy, beyond the reach of human ambition. And then the description begins. The Leviathan's back is covered in rows of shields, scales so tightly fitted against one another that they are sealed. Not air can pass between them. Not a breath. The armor of this creature is not merely tough, it is hermetically perfect, a surface so completely closed that it forms a single continuous barrier without gap or weakness. Every scale is joined to the next with a precision that defeats any instrument designed to find a flaw in it. From its mouth come burning torches. Sparks of fire leap out. Smoke pours from its nostrils as from a boiling pot over burning reeds. Its breath sets coals ablaze, and flames dart from its mouth. This is not metaphor. The text is not saying the Leviathan is as frightening as fire. It is saying the Leviathan breathes fire. Its very biology, if that is the right word, involves the production and projection of heat and light and flame. The sneezes of the Leviathan flash with light. When it rises from the water, the text says, even the mighty are afraid, and the crashing waves terrify them. And weapons are useless. Not inadequate. Not insufficient in the way that a small weapon might be insufficient against a large animal. Useless. Iron is to the Leviathan as straw. Bronze is to it as rotten wood. The arrow does not make it flee. Slingstones are like chaff to it. Clubs are regarded as pieces of straw. The weapons of human warfare, the full range of the military technology of the ancient world, are not merely ineffective against this creature. They are, from the Leviathan's perspective, irrelevant. It does not even notice them. God's speech about the Leviathan ends with one of the most sweeping statements in the entire book. It is king over all the children of pride. Whatever the Leviathan represents, whatever its status in the hierarchy of created and semi-created and chaos-adjacent beings, it stands at the apex of that wild, untamable dimension of existence. But the Leviathan is not only a creature of Job. It appears elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, and in those other appearances, its dimensions expand from the zoological into the cosmic. In Psalm 74, the text recalls the actions of God in primordial time, before human history, in the ordering of the cosmos itself. You crushed the heads of Leviathan, the psalmist writes, and gave him as food to the creatures of the desert. The heads, plural, echo the multi-headed dragon imagery that runs through both this tradition and the ancient Near Eastern mythological context that surrounds it. This is a cosmic event being remembered, not a fishing story. God crushing the heads of chaos in the moment of creation, establishing order over the primordial deep by defeating the creature that embodied its disorder. And in Isaiah 27, the Leviathan appears one final time, but this time it is not a memory of the past. It is a prophecy of the future. In that day, Isaiah writes, the Lord will punish with his sword, his fierce, great and powerful sword, Leviathan the gliding serpent, Leviathan the coiling serpent. He will slay the monster of the sea. Two descriptions, the gliding serpent and the coiling serpent. Ancient commentators understood these as describing two different aspects or manifestations of the same creature, one that moves in straight, direct lines and one that curves and wraps and twists. The creature of primordial chaos, subdued at creation and still present in the deep, still capable of rising, still associated with the adversarial and the chaotic, will face a final reckoning. The sword that the text describes is not a weapon available to any human warrior. It is divine, fierce, great, and powerful. And even that sword will be required to slay this thing. What emerges from all of these passages, held together and read as a unified tradition, is something remarkable. The biblical cosmos is not a place where chaos was simply eliminated at creation and replaced by pure order. Chaos was subdued, contained, pushed to the edges of the world, into the deep waters, into the untamed wilderness. But it was not destroyed. The Tannins still swim the primordial sea. The Rayab lurks in the depths of the prophetic imagination. The Behemoth rests in its marshes, too massive to fear the flood. And the Leviathan turns in the darkness of the deep, fire in its breath and scales sealed like armor, waiting for the day when the great sword will finally fall. The rebellion that began in the heights of heaven, among beings of fire and light, finds its counterpart in the creatures of the deep, in the chaos that was there before the ordering began and that has never entirely conceded to that ordering. From above and below, from the fallen stars and the monsters of the primordial water, the same theme sounds: something in the created order resists. Something does not submit. Something waits. And it is into that world of structured heavens and chaotic depths and ancient rebellions and untamable creatures, that the next chapter of our account descends. Because the fallen stars we traced in Revelation's imagery did not simply disappear when they hit the earth. They arrived. They found a world. And what happened when they did is one of the strangest and most consequential stories in the entire biblical tradition. We left the heavens fractured. A third of the stars swept from the sky by the tail of a great dragon, flung downward toward the earth. The primordial chaos still churning in the deep waters, subdued but never fully silenced. The architecture of the divine order intact in its upper reaches, but cracked at its foundations in ways that would take the full length of biblical history to fully reckon with. Now we descend to where those fallen stars landed. And what happened when they did? The 6th chapter of Genesis is one of the most compressed, most debated, and most consequential passages in the entire Hebrew Bible. It is only a few verses long. It introduces a situation, names its participants in the broadest possible terms, gestures at consequences of world-altering scale, and then moves on, as though what it has just described is either too large or too dangerous to linger over. Scholars have spent thousands of years trying to unpack those few verses, and the tradition that surrounds them is vast, strange, and in many ways more unsettling than the text itself. The passage reads, in its essential form, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they took wives from among them. And after this, or in connection with this, the Nephilim were on the earth. 3 elements: the sons of God, the daughters of humans, and the Nephilim. Each one of these requires careful attention. The sons of God, in Hebrew B'nai Ha-Elohim, is the same phrase used in Job to describe the members of the divine court who assemble before God, among whom the adversary moves. In the ancient interpretive tradition, the dominant understanding of this phrase in Genesis 6 was unambiguous. These were angelic beings, members of the celestial host, and they had done something that the structure of the heavens was never designed to permit. They had descended. They had looked upon the daughters of humanity and found them beautiful, and they had chosen to remain. This interpretation is not merely the product of extra-biblical imagination. It is supported by the text of 2 Peter in the New Testament, which refers explicitly to angels who sinned, who did not keep their proper domain but abandoned their own dwelling, and who are now being kept in a specific place of confinement until judgment. The letter of Jude echoes this almost word for word, describing angels who did not keep their own position but left their proper dwelling. The Greek word Jude uses for their proper dwelling is okaterion, a word that carries the sense of a fixed, assigned habitation. These beings left the station they were assigned. They abandoned their post. In the ancient Near Eastern world in which these texts were written and first received, this kind of transgression was understood in very specific terms. The boundaries between the divine and the human were fixed. They were not merely conventional. They were structural, built into the nature of the created order. To cross them was not merely a moral failing. It was a cosmic violation, a tearing of the fabric that separated one order of being from another. And the result of that violation had a name: the Nephilim. The word is Hebrew, and its etymology has been the subject of sustained scholarly debate. The most widely accepted derivation connects it to the Hebrew verb naphal, to fall. The Nephilim are, in this reading, the fallen ones. Some interpreters have understood this as a reference to their angelic parentage, beings descended from those who fell from heaven. Others have read it as a moral description, the debased ones, those who have fallen from any standard of divine order. Still others have suggested that the name means those who cause others to fall, beings whose very existence drags the world around them downward. Whatever the precise etymology, the word carries a weight that the text itself does little to soften. These beings existed. They were on the earth in those days, the text says, and also afterward. They were, in the language of Genesis, men of renown, mighty ones, Gibberim. The text does not describe their appearance in any detail. It does not tell us how large they were or what they looked like or what specifically they did. It simply acknowledges their existence and moves on toward the flood, toward the divine decision to undo and remake what had become corrupted. But the tradition that grew up around these few verses is another matter entirely. The Book of Enoch is an ancient Jewish text that did not make it into the canonical Bible, but that was considered authoritative, or at least deeply significant, by many communities in the Second Temple period. It is quoted directly in the letter of Jude, which gives it a level of scriptural traction that purely apocryphal works do not possess. And it takes the compressed account of Genesis 6 and expands it into an extraordinary narrative of transgression, corruption, and catastrophic consequence. In Enoch's account, the Watchers, those celestial sentinels we met in the book of Daniel, number 200. Their leader bears the name Shemihaza, and they gather on a mountain called Hermon to make a collective decision, to descend, to take wives from among humanity, and to bind themselves to this choice with an oath. They swear together, understanding that what they are doing is a violation of divine order, and they descend anyway. But it is not only the unions themselves that corrupt the world. It is what the Watchers bring with them. One name stands out above the others in Enoch's telling: Azazel. He is described as the chief of those Watchers who corrupted humanity not merely through their transgressive unions but through the systematic transmission of knowledge that humanity was not meant to possess. Azazel taught men how to make swords and shields and breastplates. He showed them the metals of the earth and how to work them, how to extract from raw ore the materials for weapons of war. He taught women the arts of cosmetics and ornamentation, how to enhance and manipulate appearance, which Enoch's account treats as its own form of corruption, a tool of seduction and deception. The other Watchers in Enoch's list taught additional forbidden knowledge, the movements of celestial bodies, the cutting of roots and herbs for magical purposes, the arts of enchantment and divination. What Enoch is describing is a kind of unauthorized technology transfer, a wholesale transmission of angelic knowledge into the human world before humanity was ready for it, or perhaps in a form specifically designed to harm rather than elevate. The consequence of all of this, the unions and the knowledge transfer and the corruption of the human world that followed, was the Nephilim themselves. And in Enoch's telling, the Nephilim were not merely large. They were enormous in a way that strains the imagination even of a tradition accustomed to supernatural scale. The Book of Enoch describes their height as 3,000 ells. An ell is an ancient unit of measurement approximately equivalent to 18 inches, though it varied by culture. 3,000 ells by that calculation represents a figure of such impossible scale that most readers treat it as a symbolic expression of overwhelming size rather than a literal measurement. But the point is clear: the Nephilim were not merely taller than ordinary humans. They were different in kind, beings of a magnitude that the natural world had not seen before and was not designed to accommodate. And they were hungry. Enoch describes them consuming the produce of human labor until there was nothing left, then turning to the humans themselves, and then to one another. The picture that emerges is one of spiraling devastation, a world being consumed from within by beings who were too large, too powerful, too fundamentally disordered to exist within the structures of a created order that was designed for something else entirely. It is against this backdrop that the flood of Genesis begins to read differently. The divine decision to send the flood is presented in the text as a response to the wickedness of humanity, to a world in which every inclination of the human heart was only evil all the time. But the tradition surrounding Genesis 6 frames that wickedness within a specific context, a world that has been structurally corrupted by the transgression of the Watchers, polluted at the level of its bloodlines and its knowledge and its basic orientation toward the divine order. The flood, in this reading, is not merely a punishment for human moral failing. It is a reset, a cosmic remediation, an attempt to wash clean a world that has been contaminated at a level deeper than ordinary sin, contaminated by the mixing of what should have remained separate, by the introduction of a kind of being into the human world that the human world was never meant to contain. But here the tradition takes one more extraordinary turn. Because the flood, by definition, killed the Nephilim. Their physical bodies were destroyed along with the corrupted world that had produced them. But in the ancient Jewish interpretive tradition, the death of a body is not necessarily the end of the being that inhabited it. The question that occupied the rabbis and the authors of the extra-biblical texts was this: what happens to the spirits of the Nephilim after the flood? The answer that ancient tradition settled on is one of the most consequential ideas in all of Jewish demonology. The Nephilim, being neither fully human nor fully divine, neither fully mortal nor possessed of the kind of celestial nature that would return them to the heavenly realm after death, became something new in their disembodied state. They became wanderers, unhoused spirits moving through the earth, unable to return to heaven because they were too corrupted, unable to find rest because they had no legitimate place in the order of things. In this tradition, the demons that populate the biblical and post-biblical world, the unclean spirits of the New Testament, the malicious presences that torment and deceive and possess, are not fallen angels. They are the disembodied spirits of the drowned Nephilim, still present in the world after the flood, still hungry in whatever way a spirit without a body can be hungry, still drawn to humanity in the way that their nature, formed from the union of the divine and the human, compels them to be. This is a startling idea. It means that the demonic world, in this tradition, is not simply the angelic world gone wrong. It is something more complicated, a third category of being, neither the celestial intelligences of the heavenly hierarchy nor the mortal creatures of the earthly order, but something in between, something born of a violation that should never have occurred, something still bearing the marks of that original transgression in its very nature. The parents of these spirits, the Watchers themselves, did not escape judgment. The text of 2 Peter is specific on this point, and it uses a word that appears nowhere else in the New Testament. The angels who sinned, Peter writes, God did not spare, but cast them into Tartarus. Tartarus. The word is Greek, borrowed from classical mythology, where it referred to the deepest and most inaccessible pit of the underworld, the place below Hades, the final and most absolute confinement. Peter takes this word, this image from Greek cosmology, and applies it to the imprisoned Watchers. They are there now, the text implies, held in chains of gloomy darkness, confined in a deep and lightless place, waiting for judgment. The same judgment that the psalmist glimpses in Psalm 82, where God holds court among the divine beings and renders his verdict. The same judgment that runs through the entire eschatological arc of the biblical narrative, the final settling of every account that was opened when the sons of God looked down at the daughters of humanity and chose to descend. There is a haunting quality to this part of the tradition that is different from the overwhelming strangeness of the seraphim or the terrifying power of the destroying angel. Those beings, however alien, are operating within their purpose, doing what they were made to do. The Watchers are something else. Beings who knew the structure of the divine order from the inside, who understood the boundaries and the reasons for them, and who crossed them anyway. Who swore an oath together on a mountaintop to commit a transgression they knew was a transgression. And now they wait in Tartarus, in chains of darkness, while their disembodied children wander the earth above them. The names we encounter in this tradition carry their own weight. Azazel, the teacher of weapons and war, became in later Jewish tradition a figure of particular significance in the Yom Kippur ritual, the Day of Atonement. The scapegoat of Leviticus, one of 2 goats selected on that day, is sent out into the wilderness bearing the sins of the community to a place called Azazel, a word that may mean the rocky precipice, or may be the name of the entity who dwells there. Scholars debate it. But the connection is suggestive. The annual ritual of sending the weight of human transgression out into the wilderness to the being whose own transgression is bound up with so much of what corrupted the world. And then there is a name that appears in the biblical text only once, briefly, almost in passing, and yet has generated a tradition so vast and so detailed that it has taken on a life entirely its own. In the 34th chapter of Isaiah, in a passage describing the desolation of the land of Edom, a wilderness reduced to ruin and populated only by wild creatures, the text lists the animals and beings that will inhabit the waste. Owls and ravens, jackals and ostriches, and then, in a phrase that most modern translations render cautiously as night creature or screech owl, a single Hebrew word, Lilith. Lilith. The word in its root form is connected to the Hebrew word for night, Lael. Whether Isaiah intends a specific supernatural entity or simply a nocturnal bird or animal is a question the text itself does not answer. The passage is a catalogue of desolation, and Lilith appears in it as one item among several, unremarkable in the context of the verse. But the word landed in the tradition with extraordinary force. In Jewish medieval demonology, Lilith became a figure of elaborate and terrifying specificity, a demon of the night, a creature who preys on sleeping men, a being who threatens newborn children, and in the most developed form of the legend, the first wife of Adam, created before Eve from the same earth but unwilling to submit to Adam's authority, who fled the garden and became something dangerous and demonic in the wilderness beyond it. This last tradition has no foundation in the canonical text of Genesis. It emerges from later rabbinic and Kabbalistic sources, built on that single word in Isaiah and on the interpretive need to account for apparent inconsistencies in the 2 creation accounts of Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. But the figure of Lilith, the night demon, the dark mirror of Eve, the mother of demons, took hold in the Jewish imagination with a tenacity that no amount of scholarly qualification has ever fully loosened. What this entire body of tradition, the Watchers, the Nephilim, the disembodied spirits, the imprisoned angels, the night creatures, represents is something the canonical biblical text gestures toward without fully elaborating. The idea that the world in which human history unfolds is not simply a stage set for the human story. It is populated. It is inhabited by presences and powers of various kinds, some of ancient celestial origin, some born of violations that should never have occurred, some carrying the marks of primordial chaos, some bound and waiting in darkness, some wandering without rest. The flood washed the world clean of the Nephilim's bodies. But it did not wash the world clean of everything. The spirits remained. The memory remained. And in the centuries after the waters receded, the tradition holds, the giants themselves would return. Because the text of Genesis is careful to include a detail that most readings pass over quickly. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, it says, and also afterward. After the flood. The line of the giants did not simply end at the waters. Something of them persisted, surfaced again, walked the earth in the centuries that followed in forms that the armies of Israel would eventually be sent to confront. And that is the story that comes next. The waters of the flood receded. The world that emerged from beneath them was clean, emptied, remade. The corrupted bloodlines of the Nephilim had been swept away. The watchers who had initiated the transgression were confined in the darkness of Tartarus, bound in chains, waiting. The disembodied spirits of the drowned giants wandered the wet and empty earth, looking for habitation, for purchase, for whatever a spirit without a body reaches for in the aftermath of catastrophic loss. And then, as the generations passed and the descendants of Noah spread across the face of the renewed earth, something emerged from the landscape of Canaan that should not have been there. The giants had returned. This is the problem that has occupied biblical scholars and theologians for centuries, and the text itself does not resolve it cleanly. Genesis 6 had been careful to include that seemingly incidental detail, that the Nephilim were present before the flood and also afterward, and now the afterward was here, visible in the form of enormous men inhabiting the hill country of Canaan, men so large that the people who encountered them came back with reports that strained credulity. Two explanations have circulated through the tradition. The first is genetic, that something of the Nephilim bloodline survived the flood through one of the 8 people on the ark, carried forward not as a dominant trait but as a recessive thread in the human genome that would express itself in certain lineages and certain generations in the centuries that followed. The second is more disturbing, that the transgression of Genesis 6 was not a singular event, that the boundary between the celestial and the human was crossed again after the flood, that a second incursion occurred, and that the post-flood giants were the product of a violation that the flood had failed to prevent from being repeated. The text does not choose between these explanations. It simply records the presence of the giants as a fact, and records the Israelite encounter with them as one of the defining challenges of the entire period of conquest and settlement. The most consequential of these encounters, in terms of its psychological impact on the biblical narrative, occurs before a single battle has been fought. Moses has led the people of Israel out of Egypt, through the wilderness, to the edge of the land of Canaan. Before the people enter, scouts are sent ahead to assess what they will be facing. 12 men, 1 from each tribe, are sent into the land to observe its geography, its cities, its inhabitants, and its defenses, and to return with a report. They return with one that divides them. 10 of the 12 come back terrified. The land is good, they acknowledge that, flowing with milk and honey, and they bring back a cluster of grapes so large it requires 2 men to carry it on a pole between them. But the people who live there are powerful, and their cities are fortified and very large. And then the detail that stopped the entire community cold: we saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Grasshoppers. That is the image the scouts reached for to describe the disproportion between themselves and what they had seen. Not merely smaller, not merely outmatched in numbers or equipment, but different in scale in the way that a grasshopper is different in scale from the human who looks down at it. Something that can be overlooked. Something that barely registers. The Anakim, the descendants of Anak, had been in Canaan before the Israelites arrived, and their presence gave the land a character that no amount of strategic planning could entirely account for. Their name, which may derive from a root meaning long-necked, or simply the people of the long neck, referring to their height, runs through multiple passages of the conquest narrative as a kind of recurring obstacle, a supernatural remnant of the pre-flood world that had somehow re-established itself in the very land Israel was being sent to claim. But the Anakim were not alone in the landscape of post-flood giant races. The texts of Deuteronomy and Genesis catalogue a broader world of giant peoples that inhabited the ancient Near East, each with their own name and their own geographic territory, and the collective picture they form is extraordinary. The Emim had inhabited the region later known as Moab before the Moabites displaced them. Deuteronomy describes them as having been as great and as numerous and as tall as the Anakim, a comparison that uses the Anakim as its baseline of giant proportion and then places another entire people at the same scale. The Moabites called them the Amim, a name that in Hebrew carries connotations of terror, the fearsome ones, the ones who inspire dread. They had been there, towering and numerous, and the Moabites, ordinary-sized people, had eventually driven them out, which is itself a remarkable detail. The ordinary humans had prevailed. But the memory of the Amim in the landscape was still present in the names and traditions of the region. Then there were the Zamzummim, also called the Zuzim, who had inhabited the region that would become the territory of Ammon. They too were described in the same terms, great and numerous and tall. Their fate was different from the Amims. It was not human enemies who displaced them, but God himself who destroyed them and gave their land to the Ammonites. This detail matters. These were not races of ordinary large humans. They were beings whose presence in the land was so structurally incompatible with the divine purpose for that land that their removal required direct divine action. Running through all of these peoples, the Anakim and the Amim and the Zamzummim, is a connection to a word that carries more weight in the biblical tradition than almost any other term in this entire discussion. The Rephaim. The Rephaim are one of the most genuinely strange elements in the entire biblical treatment of the post-flood giants, because the word operates simultaneously in two completely different registers of meaning, and both registers are clearly intentional. In some passages, the Rephaim are a race, a people, a physical population of giant humans who inhabit specific territories and are encountered in historical time. King Og of Bashan, one of the most vividly described giant figures in all of the Hebrew Bible, is explicitly identified as one of the last survivors of the Rephaim. The Rephaim had a valley named after them, the Valley of Rephaim, an actual geographic location near Jerusalem where David and his forces would fight repeated battles against the Philistines. The word, in these contexts, refers to something you could fight. Something that occupied land. Something that could be defeated or displaced or survived. But in other passages, the Rephaim are the dead. The shades. The spirits of the deceased who inhabit the underworld realm called Sheol. In the book of Proverbs, in Job, in Isaiah, the Rephaim are the ghostly inhabitants of the deep places below the earth, the dim and diminished remnants of those who once lived, gathered in the darkness of Sheol in a state that is neither fully alive nor fully at rest. The overlap is too precise to be accidental. The same word for the race of giants and the word for the wandering dead. Scholars have proposed various explanations, that the Rephaim were so formidable in life that their memory became associated with powerful spirits in death, that the giant races and the traditions about the restless dead were always understood to be connected in ancient Israelite and Canaanite religious thought, that the Nephilim connection runs through both usages and binds them together. Whatever the precise relationship, the dual meaning of Rephaim creates a kind of echo across the text, a resonance between the physical giants of the conquest narratives and the spiritual remnants of the dead, as though the tradition understood that these beings, in both their embodied and disembodied forms, belonged to the same category of existence. Too large, too powerful, too structurally disruptive to simply be absorbed into the ordinary order of things. Present in life as towering physical realities. Present in death as something that does not entirely depart. Among the individual figures of the post-flood giant tradition, King Og of Bashan stands out with particular vividness. He is described as the last of the Rephaim, a phrase that carries a weight of enormous historical time. Last. As though there had been many, and then fewer still, and Og was what remained of a lineage that stretched back to before the flood, to the monstrous offspring of the Watchers, now reduced to a single king ruling from a city in the region of Bashan. Moses and the Israelites defeated Og in battle, a victory that the biblical text records with a note of almost reverential weight, because the fear that Og represented was significant. God's instruction to Moses before the battle is tender in its specificity: do not be afraid of him. The same greeting that angels deliver to terrified humans is here delivered by God to Moses before a battle with a man, or what was understood to be, in some meaningful sense, more than a man. After the battle, Og's bed is measured and its dimensions recorded for posterity. 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. In the measurement systems of the ancient world, a cubit was approximately 18 inches, though it varied. 9 cubits represents something in the range of 13.5 feet in length. 4 cubits approaches 6 feet in width. The bed was made of iron, the text specifies, iron being at that time the hardest and most durable material available for such a construction. And it was kept afterward in a city called Rabbah, preserved and displayed, a relic of a lineage that was ending. Why does the text record the dimensions of a bed? Because the bed was evidence. In a world where the existence of giant races could be doubted or minimized, where the memory of the Nephilim might fade into legend and lose its weight as historical reality, a 13.5-foot iron bed sitting in a city was something you could not argue with. You could go look at it. You could measure it yourself. The text preserves the dimensions precisely because they were meant to be preserved, evidence of a reality that the narrative needed its audience to believe. The most famous giant in the biblical tradition needs little introduction. The story of David and Goliath is among the most widely known narratives in the world, so familiar that it has become a cultural idiom for any confrontation between a small, unlikely opponent and an overwhelming adversary. But the familiarity of the story has a way of obscuring what the text actually says about Goliath of Gath. He stood 6 cubits and a span. By the standard cubit measurement, this places him somewhere above 9 feet in height, a figure that exceeds even the most generous estimates for natural human gigantism. His armor is described in precise and almost admiring detail: a bronze helmet, a coat of scale armor weighing 5,000 shekels of bronze, bronze greaves on his legs, a bronze javelin slung between his shoulders. His spear shaft was like a weaver's beam, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. He had a shield bearer who walked before him. This is not the description of a large man. It is the description of a military installation in the form of a human being, a figure so heavily armored and so massively armed that the bronze and iron alone would have been nearly immovable for an ordinary soldier. But what the story of Goliath reveals, when you read the chapters that follow it, is that he was not an anomaly among his people. He was, in some sense, representative of a broader reality in Gath and among the Philistines of that period. Because the later chapters of 2 Samuel record a series of battles between David's warriors and giants of Philistine descent, and Goliath is only the most famous of them. Ishbi-benob came against David himself, not a young shepherd this time but an aging king. The giant carried a bronze spear whose head alone weighed 300 shekels, and he came with clear intent to execute the king of Israel. It was Abishai, one of David's most formidable warriors, who intervened and struck the giant down. The text records the aftermath with a note of concern that feels genuinely tender. David's men swore to him that he would not go out to battle with them again. He was too valuable, too essential, too irreplaceable to risk against beings of that kind. "Let the lamp of Israel not be extinguished," they said. Then there was Saph, also recorded as Sippai, another giant of Philistine descent, struck down at a place called Gob by a man named Sibbecai the Hushathite. A brief entry in the record, a few words that compress an entire life and death and confrontation into a single verse. But there he is, another one, another remnant of a lineage that kept producing these figures in the landscape of Philistia. and Lami, the brother of Goliath. His spear shaft, like his brother's, is described as being as thick as a weaver's rod, the same phrase used for Goliath, suggesting that this was a family characteristic, a heritable physical trait expressed across siblings. The lineage of Gath produced these figures with what the text treats as regularity. There were simply giants there. Multiple of them. Brothers. And then one more, unnamed but unforgettable. A man of great stature, also from Gath, who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. 24 digits in total. The text records this physical anomaly with the same matter-of-fact precision with which it records the dimensions of spears and the weights of armor, as though the polydactyly is simply another data point in the catalogue of these beings' physical difference from ordinary humanity. This unnamed giant was also killed by one of David's warriors, a man named Jonathan, the son of David's brother Shimeah. The collective portrait that emerges from these passages, Ishbi-Benob and Saph and Lami and the 6-fingered man of Gath, is of a community, the Philistine city of Gath in particular, where the giant bloodline had concentrated and persisted. 4 giants, perhaps more, attached to a single city, a single regional population. All of them formidable enough that the warriors sent against them are named and remembered. All of them, ultimately, defeated. There is something significant in that pattern of defeat. The giants of the post-flood world, for all their size and power and physical overwhelmingness, lose. Goliath falls to a shepherd's stone. Og falls to Moses and his army at God's command. The Anakim are driven out of the hill country by Joshua, and the text records with quiet satisfaction that none of the Anakite people were left in the land of Israel, though some remained in the Philistine cities of Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. The same cities that would later produce Goliath and his brothers. The remnants of the Anakim, driven from the Israelite territories, had taken refuge in Philistia, and in Philistia their bloodline had continued, producing the giants that David's warriors would spend years systematically hunting down. Among David's soldiers, one name deserves particular attention in this context. Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, is described in the text as one of the most formidable warriors in Israel's history, a man whose exploits are recorded with a kind of appreciative specificity that suggests they were legendary even in his own time. Among his documented feats is an encounter with an Egyptian warrior described as a man of great stature, 5 cubits tall, 7.5 feet. Large by any standard, enormous by the standards of the ancient world. Benaiah killed this man with the man's own spear, having gone into the encounter armed only with a staff. He grabbed the spear from the Egyptian's hand and killed him with it. The detail is almost cinematic in its precision, and it speaks to something important. The warriors who fought the remnants of the giant races were themselves extraordinary, men whose courage and skill and ferocity were in some sense proportionate to the opponents they faced. What does this entire tradition, taken together, mean? The post-flood giant races represent something in the biblical narrative that is never fully resolved, a loose end in the cosmic story that the texts record without fully tying off. The Watchers are bound in Tartarus. Their disembodied children wander the earth as unclean spirits. Their physical descendants, the post-flood giants, are systematically defeated and reduced across the centuries of the biblical narrative, driven from the highlands to the coastal cities, from the coastal cities to individual warriors, from individual warriors to a final silence. But the bodies of the giants are buried somewhere in the soil of Canaan. The spirits of the drowned Nephilim still move through the world. The memory of the Rephaim persists in the geography of the land, in the valley that still bears their name, in the traditions that still use their word for the wandering dead. Nothing is entirely gone. Nothing is entirely over. The giants diminish. The giant races are conquered or displaced or simply dwindle until they are no longer a collective presence, until they are reduced to individuals, to brothers, to a single six-fingered man in a Philistine city who is the last of his kind. And then, for the most part, they pass from the historical record. But what remains behind them is a world that has been shaped by their presence. A world where the soil of Canaan holds the bones of beings who were too large for the ordinary human story. A world where the valley near Jerusalem is still called by the name of the giants who once walked it. A world where the traditions of demonic spirits, of unclean presences that pursue and oppress and torment, are understood by the oldest layers of the tradition to be connected to this ancient violation, to the transgression of the Watchers and the monstrous beings they left behind. The giants are gone, but the world they haunted is still the world we inhabit. And the beings that emerged from their destruction are still, in the biblical narrative, very much present. Which brings us, at last, to the dark hierarchy that operates below the surface of the biblical world. The organized, structured, named forces of opposition that the New Testament and the prophetic literature describe with a specificity that matches, in its way, the hierarchy of the heavens we traced at the very beginning. The fallen have their own order, their own ranks and territories and domains. And it is to that world that we now descend. The world above the earth, as we have traced it, is structured and populated and alive with presences that bear almost no resemblance to the gentle imagery of popular tradition. The world below the earth, it turns out, is no less complex, no less inhabited, and in its own way, no less organized. To understand the shadow realm of the biblical world, we have to begin with the place itself. The geography of the afterlife in the Hebrew Bible is not divided, as later Christian tradition would divide it, into a bright heaven above and a fiery hell below. It is something older and stranger and in many ways more melancholy than either of those destinations. It is called Sheol. Sheol is difficult to translate precisely, and that difficulty is itself informative. It is sometimes rendered as the grave, sometimes as the pit, sometimes simply left as Sheol, because no single English word captures what the Hebrew writers meant by it. It is the place of the dead. All of the dead, initially. Not merely the wicked or the condemned, but everyone who dies, the righteous and the unrighteous alike, descends to Sheol. The patriarchs expect to go there. Jacob, grieving for his son Joseph whom he believes to be dead, says that he will go down to Sheol mourning. The psalmist descends there. Even Samuel, the great prophet and judge of Israel, is found there when the narrative requires him to be reached. Sheol is described in the Hebrew Bible as a place of darkness and silence, a place where the dead exist in a diminished state that the tradition calls the Rephaim, that same word we have already encountered as the name for the giant races, here used for the shadowy inhabitants of the underworld, the shades, the pale remnants of those who once lived fully in the world above. They do not praise God in Sheol, the psalmist notes, with what feels like genuine grief. They are not gone, exactly, but they are not present either. They exist in a kind of twilight, subterranean and silent, in a realm that the text consistently places downward, beneath the earth, beneath the waters, at the furthest possible remove from the heavens above. The geography matters. The biblical cosmos is vertical in its moral and spiritual orientation. The heavens above, where the divine throne sits and the celestial host moves in ordered purpose. The earth in the middle, where the human story unfolds. And Sheol below, where the dead wait in their diminished state. Height is associated with life, with power, with the divine. Depth is associated with death, with silence, with the absence of light. The demons and wandering spirits we have been tracing move through the middle world, the earth, but their natural orientation is downward, toward the desolate and empty places, toward the arid wilderness, toward the ruins, toward Sheol. The transition between the Old Testament concept of Sheol and the New Testament concept of Gehenna is one of the most significant developments in the entire biblical tradition, and it is rooted, with striking literalness, in a specific geographic location outside the walls of Jerusalem: the Valley of Hinnom. In Hebrew, Hinnom, which the Greek renders as Gehenna. This was a real valley, a physical place that could be visited and walked through, that ran along the southern and western edges of ancient Jerusalem. And it carried a history so dark, so contaminated by centuries of abomination, that its very name became synonymous with ultimate destruction. In the period of the monarchy, the Valley of Hinnom was the site of sacrifices to the god Molech, a deity associated with fire and with the consumption of children. The text of 2 Kings describes how some of the kings of Judah, in their periods of deepest apostasy, caused their sons to pass through fire in this valley, a phrase whose precise meaning is debated but whose general association with child sacrifice is well established in both the biblical text and the archaeological record. The prophet Jeremiah cursed the valley explicitly, declaring that its name would be changed to the Valley of Slaughter, a place of such accumulated horror that it would become a byword for desolation and judgment. By the time of the New Testament, Gehenna had become the standard term for the place of final punishment, the ultimate destination of the wicked after judgment. Jesus uses the word more than any other figure in the New Testament, and he uses it specifically and deliberately, often with the phrase where the fire is not quenched and the worm does not die. It is not a metaphor borrowed from mythology or imported from Greek philosophical tradition. It is a name taken from the landscape outside the city walls, from a valley that had been so thoroughly corrupted by what was done in it that it had become, in the moral geography of the tradition, the earthly address of ultimate judgment. The distance between Sheol and Gehenna, between the quiet, melancholy underworld of the Hebrew Bible and the fiery place of final destruction in the New Testament, represents one of the clearest examples of how the biblical tradition develops and deepens across its length. What begins as a general destination for all the dead becomes, by the end of the canon, a differentiated landscape, a place of waiting and a place of final judgment, a temporary state and a permanent one, a silence and a fire. And running through both of these realms, connecting them to the world of the living in ways that the biblical tradition found deeply alarming, was the practice of attempting to communicate with the dead. The story of the medium of Ender is one of the most extraordinary passages in the entire Hebrew Bible, not merely for what happens in it, but for what it implies about the structure of the spiritual world. King Saul, in the final days before the battle that would kill him, finds himself in a state of absolute desperation. God has withdrawn from him, the text says. The prophets give him no answer. His dreams are silent. And the Philistine army is arrayed against him in such numbers that the sight of it fills him with terror. Saul had, earlier in his reign, driven out all the mediums and spiritists from the land of Israel, in obedience to the Mosaic law that prescribed the death penalty for such practices. Now, stripped of every other source of guidance, he asks his servants to find him a medium, a woman who can consult the dead. There is one, they tell him, at Ender. He goes to her in disguise, at night. He asks her to bring up Samuel. The prophet Samuel, who had anointed Saul as king, who had been the spiritual authority of Israel for decades, who had died and been mourned by the entire nation, was now in Sheol. And Saul, in his desperation, wanted to hear his voice one more time. What happens next is, theologically, deeply strange. The medium performs whatever ritual she performs, and something comes up. The text says that when she sees what comes up, she cries out in fear, which suggests that what appears is not the usual product of her craft, not whatever she normally produced for her clients, but something different, something real, something that frightens even her. She describes what she sees to Saul, an old man coming up, wrapped in a robe. Saul knows immediately who it is. He bows with his face to the ground. And Samuel speaks. And what he says is exactly what Saul feared. "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? The Lord has departed from you. Tomorrow you and your sons will be with me in Sheol." Samuel, from his place in the underworld, delivers the final verdict on Saul's reign with a calm, exhausted precision that is more devastating than any thunderclap. "Tomorrow you will be with me." The theological implications of this passage have occupied scholars for centuries. Did the medium actually summon Samuel? Was this really the prophet's spirit, or a demonic imitation? Did God permit the summoning as a final act of judgment, allowing Saul to hear his doom from the mouth of the man whose counsel he had ignored in life? The tradition has not settled on a single answer. But the text itself is written as though the encounter was real, as though Samuel genuinely came up from Sheol, as though the boundary between the living and the dead was crossed that night in a room in Ender. The practice this story involves, the consulting of familiar spirits, the attempt to communicate with the dead or with spirits who claimed knowledge of hidden things, was among the most strictly forbidden practices in the entire Mosaic Code. Leviticus lists it alongside murder and child sacrifice in its most serious prohibitions, prescribing the death penalty for anyone who consults a medium or a spiritist. The Hebrew term associated with this practice, av, is sometimes translated as familiar spirit, a phrase that carries its own history of interpretation but that in the ancient context referred to a spirit that claimed to serve as an intermediary between the living and the dead, whether that spirit was what it claimed to be or something else entirely. The strictness of the prohibition tells us something important. These were not merely superstitions being condemned. The law was this severe because the practice was considered genuinely dangerous, genuinely real, and genuinely connected to powers that the Israelite community was specifically commanded to have nothing to do with. The spirits that mediums consulted were not understood to be fictional. They were understood to be real beings, deeply hostile to human flourishing, operating in the spiritual landscape of the world with purposes that ran counter to the divine order. In the New Testament, the language shifts. The Hebrew terms for evil spirits give way to the Greek daemonion, and the picture that emerges from the Gospel accounts is of a world thick with these presences. They inhabit people. They afflict them with illness, with violence, with loss of self. They cry out when they encounter the presence of Jesus, recognizing him in a way that the human witnesses often do not. They beg not to be destroyed, not to be sent to the abyss before the appointed time, a phrase that suggests an awareness of the eschatological timetable, a knowledge that their current freedom is temporary and conditional. One detail that appears in the Gospel accounts is worth pausing on. When Jesus describes the behavior of an unclean spirit that has been driven out of a person, he says that the spirit wanders through waterless places seeking rest and finding none. Dry places, arid wilderness, desolate regions. This is, in the context of everything we have traced so far, a deeply resonant image. These are beings that emerged, in the oldest tradition, from the drowned Nephilim, beings whose first experience of death was the flood, the overwhelming water that destroyed them. And now they wander through dry places, through the antithesis of water, seeking rest in the desert landscapes that are the furthest possible remove from the element that ended them. Whether this connection was consciously intended by every writer who described it, or whether it is simply part of a coherent underlying tradition that shaped how these beings were understood across centuries of Jewish and early Christian thought, the consistency is remarkable. The spirits that wander through the dry wilderness of the biblical world carry in their very behavior the mark of what they are and where they came from. The wilderness is also the home of another category of being that appears in the Hebrew Bible in ways that have fascinated and unsettled readers across the centuries. In the 13th chapter of Isaiah, in a passage describing the desolation of fallen Babylon, the text catalogues the creatures that will inhabit the ruins: owls, jackals, ostriches, and then, among them, beings the Hebrew calls serim. The word means, literally, hairy ones, or goat creatures. The King James Version renders them as satyrs, borrowing the classical Greek image of half-human, half-goat figures, beings associated in Greek mythology with wildness, with the untamed edges of the world, with the spaces outside of civilization. The same word appears in Leviticus, in a passage warning Israel not to offer sacrifices to the serim, a prohibition that implies these beings were understood to exist, to be present in the wilderness, and to be the kind of thing that a misguided person might actually attempt to worship. Isaiah, in his vision of desolated Babylon, describes the serim dancing in the ruins. Not merely inhabiting the ruins, but dancing in them, capering in the wreckage of a civilization that had been destroyed, celebrating in the emptiness that human arrogance and divine judgment had produced. It is a deeply strange image, these goat creatures moving through the collapsed columns and the silent courtyards of what had been the greatest city in the world, and it reinforces a pattern that runs through many of these passages: the association of demonic beings with ruin, with desolation, with the places from which human presence and divine order have withdrawn. The demonic world of the biblical tradition is not merely a collection of individual malevolent spirits operating independently. As the architecture of the heavens has its hierarchy, its council and its archangels and its orders of angelic beings, so the shadow realm has its own structure, its own princes, its own territorial divisions and chains of command. The 10th chapter of the book of Daniel contains one of the most remarkable passages in the entire Bible on the subject of spiritual warfare, and it describes this structure with a specificity that is almost bureaucratic in its precision. Daniel has been fasting and mourning for 3 weeks, seeking understanding from God about a vision he has received. At the end of the 3 weeks, a heavenly messenger arrives, a being of such luminous power that the men with Daniel, though they cannot see him, are seized with terror and flee to hide themselves, while Daniel himself collapses and loses all strength. The messenger's explanation for his delay is extraordinary. He had been dispatched, he tells Daniel, from the moment Daniel began his prayer, 21 days ago. But for those 21 days, he had been engaged in battle with a being identified as the Prince of Persia. The Prince of Persia, not the human king of Persia, who in the narrative of Daniel is presented as a relatively reasonable and sympathetic figure. A supernatural prince. A being of considerable power who exercises spiritual dominion over the earthly empire of Persia and who had the capacity to delay and contend with a heavenly messenger for 3 weeks of sustained conflict. The implications of this detail are extensive. It means that the delay in Daniel's answered prayer was not due to divine indifference or the insufficiency of Daniel's fasting. It was due to a war being fought in an invisible dimension, a war between a heavenly angel and a demonic territorial power over the spiritual authority that governed the Persian Empire. The struggle between the divine and the adversarial was not merely cosmic and abstract. It was specific, geographic, jurisdictional. There were territories, and those territories had princes, and those princes contested the movements of the heavenly host. The heavenly messenger tells Daniel that only the arrival of Michael, the archangel, the great prince and commander of the celestial armies, allowed him to break free and finally reach Daniel. Michael came to help him against the Prince of Persia. 2 celestial beings of significant rank, working together to overcome a single territorial demon. This is a measure of that demon's power. And the messenger adds, almost in passing, a detail that extends the picture further still. When he departs from Daniel, he will return to the battle against the Prince of Persia. And when he has dealt with the Prince of Persia, another will come against him, the Prince of Greece. The Prince of Greece. Another territorial power, associated with another earthly empire, waiting in the wings of history, ready to take the stage as Persia's dominance wanes and the Greek Empire rises. The spiritual princes and the earthly empires are aligned, the rise and fall of human civilizations mirrored in the invisible battles of the supernatural powers that claim dominion over them. What Daniel 10 reveals is a picture of the world in which human political history is the surface expression of a much deeper conflict, one fought between beings we cannot see over territories that human armies simultaneously contest with weapons we can. The Persian army and the Prince of Persia. The Greek phalanx and the Prince of Greece. Two levels of war, running in parallel, interpenetrating, each affecting the other in ways that no purely materialist or purely spiritual reading of history can fully account for. This is the shadow realm in its full complexity. Not a simple underworld. Not merely a place where bad things go, but a structured, hierarchical, territorially organized dimension of reality that operates in direct correspondence with the human world, that has its own princes and its own battles and its own long-term strategies, and that presses against the visible world at every point. The beings who inhabit it range from the wandering spirits in their dry wilderness to the demonic princes who contest the movements of archangels. From the Serim dancing in the ruins of fallen cities to the adversary who stands in the celestial courtroom pressing his accusations. From the disembodied Nephilim spirits seeking habitation to whatever it was that the medium of Ender reached in the darkness beneath the world and pulled, briefly, unwillingly, back toward the light. The shadow realm is not separate from the world the biblical narrative describes. It is woven through it. It is the underside of the visible, the dimension below the surface of the human story, structured and purposeful and ancient beyond reckoning. And it is not without opposition. Because running through every passage we have traced tonight, from the burning ones at the divine throne to the archangel fighting his way through 21 days of supernatural war to reach a fasting prophet on the banks of the Tigris, is the persistent, unwavering presence of the heavenly host. The same hierarchy that has its fallen mirror image in the shadow realm maintains its ordered, purposed, relentless movement through the story of the world. The war between them is the oldest war in the biblical account. Older than humanity. Older than the flood. Older than the giants and the watchers and the fallen stars. It began somewhere in the architecture of the heavens, in a moment when a being of great brilliance decided that his own light was enough, that he had no need of the position he had been given, that a higher throne was available to those willing to reach for it. That moment is still unresolved. The war is still being fought. The Prince of Persia has successors. The disembodied spirits still wander through their dry places. The Leviathan still moves in the deep, waiting for the great sword that will finally fall. But the heavenly host still moves as well. The seraphim still cry their thunder around the divine throne. Michael still stands as the great prince over the people of the covenant. The seven who stand before God still carry their purposes through the length of history, unseen and uncountable and entirely, implacably present. This is the world the Bible describes, when you read it all the way down to its foundations. A world that is far older, far stranger, far more densely populated with intelligences and powers and ancient conflicts than the surface of the text, read quickly and casually, would ever suggest. It is a world that rewards the kind of slow, patient, careful attention that the night hours invite. A world that opens, gradually, to those who are willing to sit with the strangeness of it, to resist the urge to domesticate it into familiar categories, to let the burning wheels and the wrestling angels and the princes of nations and the fire-breathing creatures of the deep be as strange and as real and as overwhelming as the people who first encountered them found them to be. There is more still to trace. The eschatological horizon, the final war, the binding and the loosing, the creatures of the apocalypse that make even the Leviathan seem like a prelude. But for now, let the shadow realm settle around you. Let the dry wilderness where the wandering spirits move be somewhere out beyond the edges of the known. Let the deep places hold their ancient creatures in their ancient darkness. Let the princes of nations fight their invisible wars in the spaces between history and mystery. The night is long, and the story is not yet finished. There is a thread that runs through the entire length of the biblical narrative, from the wilderness wanderings of Israel to the dusty roads of first-century Galilee, a thread that connects the supernatural world we have been tracing to the lived, embodied experience of ordinary human beings. It is the thread of direct encounter. Not the distant vision of the prophet, not the cosmic imagery of apocalyptic literature, but something closer and more immediate. The moment when the invisible world presses through the surface of the visible one, and a human being finds themselves face to face with something they cannot explain and cannot escape. These encounters are among the most vivid passages in all of Scripture. They are also among the most carefully observed. The biblical writers who recorded them were not reaching for abstraction or metaphor. They were writing down what happened, with the specificity of people who understood that the details mattered, that the texture of the encounter was part of its meaning. We begin in the wilderness, where so many of the Bible's strangest episodes take place. The Israelites, in the years of their desert wandering between Egypt and Canaan, were not a patient people. The Book of Numbers records a pattern of complaint and crisis that repeats with a weary regularity. The people grow dissatisfied, they speak against God and against Moses, and the consequences arrive with a swiftness that leaves no ambiguity about the connection between the transgression and the punishment. In one of these episodes, the people complain about the food, about the manna that has sustained them through the wilderness, and the response is unlike anything that has come before it. Fiery serpents come among the people. The Hebrew is nachash seraph, a phrase that combines the word for serpent with the same root word as the name of the seraphim, the burning ones we encountered in Isaiah's vision of the divine throne. These are serpents of fire, or burning serpents, venomous in a way that the text describes as supernatural in its lethality. People are bitten. People die. The community, suddenly and viscerally aware of what their complaining has produced, comes to Moses and confesses. Moses prays. And the divine response is one of the most unusual objects in the entire biblical narrative. God instructs Moses to make a serpent out of bronze and mount it on a pole. Anyone who has been bitten, if they look at it, will live. The object is made. It works. And it is preserved, this bronze serpent on a pole, carried through the wilderness and eventually into the settled land of Israel, where it is kept for centuries. By the time of King Hezekiah, the reforming king who also faced the Assyrian army and was protected by the destroying angel, the bronze serpent had acquired a name, Nehushtan, and had become an object of worship, with people burning incense to it. Hezekiah broke it into pieces, the text notes approvingly. But before he broke it, Jesus in the Gospel of John reaches back to it as a deliberate image, comparing himself to the bronze serpent lifted up in the wilderness, saying that as Moses lifted up the serpent in the desert, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. A healing instrument, a thing made in the form of the very thing that was killing people, raised high on a pole for people to look toward. The image moves through centuries and meanings with a persistence that suggests it carries more weight than any single interpretation can fully hold. The serpent as a category of supernatural being, as something that operates at the intersection of the natural and the demonic, appears in the biblical tradition with a consistency that is worth noting. From the serpent in the Garden of Eden, described with a subtlety and agency that exceeds any ordinary animal, to the seraphim whose name connects them etymologically to the fiery serpents, to the Leviathan coiling in the deep, to the dragon of Revelation explicitly identified as the ancient serpent, the serpentine form is one of the Bible's persistent images for the adversarial and the supernaturally dangerous. The creature the King James Version calls the cockatrice, rendered in more modern translations as the basilisk or the viper, appears in Isaiah in a passage that uses it as an image of uncompromising danger. The cockatrice of classical mythology was a creature hatched from a viper's egg, combining the qualities of serpent and bird into something that killed with its gaze or its breath alone. Whether Isaiah intends a literal creature or a metaphorical one drawn from the mythological vocabulary available to his audience, the image he reaches for is the same: something produced by corruption, born from poison, and lethal in ways that ordinary defenses cannot counter. The same Isaiah passage speaks of nursing children playing over the hole of a cobra and weaned children putting their hands into the viper's nest without harm, images of a future reconciliation between humanity and the serpentine forces that have been adversarial since the garden. The dangerous creatures of the natural and supernatural world are not, in the prophetic vision, eternally hostile. There is an eschatological horizon beyond which even these old enmities are resolved. But that horizon is still distant. In the world of the biblical narrative, the encounters with demonic forces are immediate and specific, and they require specific responses. We have met Azazel before in our account, in the Book of Enoch's tradition as the chief of the fallen watchers, the one who taught humanity the arts of weapon-making and the corruptions of vanity. But Azazel's presence in the canonical biblical text is found in a passage that is, on its surface, about ritual rather than narrative, about ceremony rather than encounter. And it is one of the most theologically dense passages in the entire Torah. The 16th chapter of Leviticus describes the ritual of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the holiest day in the Israelite religious calendar. 2 goats are selected. Lots are cast to determine their fates. 1 goat is sacrificed as a sin offering to God. The other is treated differently. The high priest lays his hands on its head, confesses over it all the sins and transgressions of the entire community, transfers them symbolically onto the animal, and then sends it away into the wilderness, into the desert. Alive, bearing the weight of the community's accumulated sin. And the text specifies where it is sent. For Azazel. The phrase is as simple and as strange as that. Not into the wilderness generally. Not to a specific geographic location. For Azazel. The Hebrew preposition used is the same one used earlier in the passage for the goat sent to God. 1 goat for God. 1 goat for Azazel. The identity of Azazel in this passage has generated more sustained scholarly debate than almost any other single term in the Torah. Is Azazel the name of a place, a rocky cliff from which the goat was thrown? Is it an abstract concept, a word meaning complete removal or utter destruction? Or is it, as the Enochic tradition insists, the name of a being, a supernatural entity in the wilderness, and the ritual is an act of returning to that entity the weight of the sins that were committed in connection with its original corruption of humanity? If the third reading is correct, and it has serious scholarly support and ancient precedent, then the Yom Kippur ritual is something extraordinary, the annual acknowledgement, built into the most sacred ceremony of Israelite religion, of a dark counterpart to the divine recipient of the other goat. Not worship of Azazel, but recognition of his existence, his location in the wilderness, his connection to human sin. 1 goat for God. One goat for the entity whose transgression is bound up with so much of what the other goat's sins represent. From the wilderness and its ancient ceremonies, we move to a story in the Book of Tobit that gives us one of the most detailed and domestically specific demonic encounters in all of ancient literature. The demon Asmodeus, whose name derives from a Persian or Avestan root that scholars have connected to a figure associated with wrath or destruction, has become attached to a woman named Sarah in the city of Ecbatana. The attachment is lethal. Sarah has been married 7 times. On each wedding night, before the marriage could be consummated, Asmodeus killed her husband. 7 men, dead in sequence, in the same chamber, on the same night that should have been the beginning of their lives with her. The text does not describe the manner of their deaths in detail. It notes simply that Asmodeus loved Sarah and could not tolerate a rival. Sarah is in despair. She is accused by her father's maidservants of being responsible for the deaths, a malicious human cruelty layered on top of the supernatural one. She prays for death. And her prayer, along with the prayer of Tobias's blind father Tobit in another city entirely, rises together before God, and Raphael is sent. We have already traced how the story resolves. Tobias, guided by Raphael in disguise, uses the heart and liver of a fish burned on coals to drive Asmodeus away when he comes on the wedding night. The smell, Raphael has instructed him, will repel the demon. Asmodeus flees to Egypt, to the upper desert, and Raphael pursues him and binds him there. The details of the Asmodeus story carry within them a logic of demonic behavior that maps onto what the broader tradition describes. The demon is territorial in the sense of being attached to a specific person. He acts from something the text frames as a kind of possessive desire. And he is defeated not by force alone but by a specific ritual action performed with specific materials, a detail that resonates with the broader tradition of angelic and demonic interactions following their own internal rules and protocols. By the time of the New Testament, the demonic encounters become more frequent, more public, and more dramatically confrontational. The Gospel accounts treat demon possession not as an exceptional or rare phenomenon but as a common feature of the world Jesus moved through, an almost routine dimension of the suffering he encountered on the roads of Galilee and Judea. The name Beelzebub, which the Pharisees deploy as an accusation against Jesus when they cannot otherwise account for his power over demons, has a history that illuminates the broader landscape of supernatural politics in the ancient Near East. The name derives from Beelzebub, a Philistine deity whose name appears in 2 Kings when the Israelite king Ahaziah sends messengers to consult him about whether the king will recover from an injury. The name Beelzebub means, in straightforward translation, Lord of the Flies, and it was understood in Israelite tradition as a deliberate mockery of the Philistine deity, a distortion of his actual name designed to diminish and demean him. By the New Testament period, Beelzebub had become a title for the prince of demons, the figure at the top of the demonic hierarchy, the adversary himself referred to by a name that began as a joke and became something more serious. When the Pharisees accused Jesus of casting out demons by Beelzebub, they are making a specific and pointed theological accusation, that the power he exercises comes not from God but from the organizing intelligence of the demonic world itself. Jesus' response is logical and precise. A kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. If Satan is casting out Satan, he is working against himself. The argument is rhetorical but its implications are theological. The demonic order is coherent enough to have interests, to have internal consistency, to be capable of either unity or division. It has a prince. It has a structure. And that structure, Jesus is saying, would not rationally expend its resources undermining itself. The individual demonic encounters in the Gospel accounts vary in their details, but several of them carry a specificity that distinguishes them from the general background of possession and healing. Mary Magdalene, one of the most prominent figures in Jesus' circle of followers, one of the women present at the crucifixion and the first to encounter the risen Jesus in the garden, is described in Luke's Gospel with a biographical detail of striking precision. 7 demons had been cast out of her. 7. The number is specific. Not many demons, not several, but 7, the same number as the angels who stand before God, the same number as the spirits that return with greater force to the undefended house in Jesus' warning. Mary's life before her encounter with Jesus was shaped by a 7-fold possession, a complete occupation of her inner life by forces whose nature the text does not elaborate but whose number is recorded with deliberate exactness. Whatever her experience was, it was total, and the liberation from it was equally total. The most dramatically described demonic encounter in the Gospel accounts is the one that takes place in the region of the Gerasenes, or Gadarenes, on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus and his disciples have crossed the water and arrived in Gentile territory when they are met by a man from the tombs, a figure who has become one of the most vivid characters in all of the Gospels precisely because the detail in which he is described is so particular and so human even in its extremity. He lives among the tombs. He cannot be restrained. Chains have been tried, and he has broken them. He roams the mountains day and night, crying out and cutting himself with stones. He is, the text implies, a man who has lost himself entirely, whose body has become a habitation for something that has driven the person he was into an inner exile. When he sees Jesus, he runs toward him and falls at his feet. And what speaks through him is not the man. What speaks is what lives in him. Jesus asks for a name. My name is Legion, for we are many. Legion. The word is the Latin term for a Roman military unit of approximately 6,000 soldiers. Whether the number is precise or whether it is being used as an image of overwhelming multiplicity, the statement is designed to communicate something specific about the nature of what occupies this man. It is not one entity but many, organized enough to speak with a single voice but numerous enough to constitute something like an army, a garrison of possessing spirits that has taken a man for its territory. And they are afraid. They beg, as the text says, earnestly, not to be sent out of the region. Not to be sent to the abyss before the appointed time, the phrase that echoes through multiple demonic encounters in the Gospels, suggesting that these beings are aware of the eschatological timeline, aware that there is a moment of final judgment coming, aware that their current freedom is operating within a borrowed window of time. They negotiate. There is a herd of pigs nearby, around 2,000 of them, feeding on the hillside. Send us into the pigs. Jesus permits it. The immediate result is catastrophic for the pigs. The entire herd, 2,000 animals, rushes down the steep bank into the sea and drowns. The violence of the response has struck readers across centuries as almost shocking in its completeness. 2,000 animals, dead in moments. The local herdsmen flee to the city with the news, and the people come out to see for themselves. They find the man who had been Legion, sitting quietly, clothed, in his right mind. And they are afraid. More afraid, it seems, of this than of anything that had gone before. The text says they begged Jesus to leave the region. This response is worth sitting with for a moment. The community had lived with the man among the tombs for what was apparently a long time. They had watched him break chains. They had presumably grown accustomed to the sounds of his suffering in the hills. But the sight of him restored, sitting and clothed and in his right mind, frightened them more. Whether the fear was of the power that had produced this change, or of the disruption to a world whose shape they had come to accept, or of something they could not articulate, the text records it without explaining it. Jesus teaches, elsewhere in the Gospel accounts, about the mechanics of possession and the dangers of incomplete deliverance. When an unclean spirit is driven out of a person, he says, it passes through waterless places, seeking rest, finding none. That image again, the wandering through the dry wilderness, the restless movement through arid spaces that we have encountered before in the tradition of the wandering Nephilim spirits. And finding no rest, the spirit returns to the person from whom it came, and it finds the house empty, swept, and put in order. Empty. It is the word that carries the full weight of the warning. A person from whom a demon has been expelled but who has not been filled with something else, who has not reoriented their inner life toward the divine order that was always its intended structure, is a swept and empty house. A clean house. An attractive vacancy. And the spirit returns, and it brings with it 7 others more wicked than itself. The final state of that person, Jesus concludes, is worse than the first. The warning is not merely about individual spiritual hygiene, though it is that. It is about the nature of the spiritual vacuum, about the impossibility of a neutral inner life in a world structured the way the biblical world is structured. The house cannot remain empty. It will be occupied by something, by the divine order it was designed for, or by the forces that move through the dry places looking for exactly this kind of availability. The final encounter we trace in this section comes from the Acts of the Apostles, from a city in Macedonia called Philippi, where Paul and his companions have traveled in the early days of the church's expansion. They are met by a slave girl who, the text tells us, had a spirit of divination that brought her owners considerable profit through fortune-telling. The Greek word used for her spirit is remarkable in its specificity, pneumapathona, a python spirit, a reference to the great serpent of Greek mythology that was said to possess the oracle at Delphi, the most famous prophetic site in the ancient world. The slave girl follows Paul and his companions through the city for several days, crying out that these men are servants of the Most High God who are proclaiming the way of salvation. She is saying something true. But Paul, the text says, was greatly troubled in his spirit, and eventually turned to address what was speaking through her directly. In the name of Jesus Christ, he commanded the spirit, "Come out of her." And it came out that very hour. The theological complexity of this moment is quietly extraordinary. The python spirit was producing accurate prophecy through this girl. It was saying true things about Paul and his companions. And Paul cast it out anyway, troubled by its presence in a way that the accurate content of its pronouncements did not resolve. In the biblical economy, the source of a truth matters as much as the truth itself. Knowledge flowing through channels that belong to the adversarial order is contaminated by its source, whatever its content. The girl's owners, who had been profiting from her divination and were now furious at its loss, dragged Paul and Silas before the city magistrates, and the apostles were beaten and imprisoned. It is a quietly ironic detail in the long narrative of demonic encounters. The successful exorcism led immediately to earthly consequences that looked, from the outside, like defeat. But the spirit was gone. The house was no longer occupied by a python. What would fill it next, the text does not say. But the encounter in Philippi closes a circle that opened in the wilderness with the fiery serpents, that ran through the bronze Nehushtan on its pole, through the Leviathan in the deep and the cockatrice in its nest and the ancient serpent in the garden, and found its way to a slave girl on a street in a Macedonian city, speaking true words through a false channel, until the name that was stronger than the python's name was spoken over her. The pattern of all these encounters, taken together, is consistent. The supernatural forces that move through the shadow realm of the biblical world are real, organized, territorial, and capable of producing genuine effects in the physical and psychological lives of the people they attach to or inhabit. but they are not beyond the reach of a corresponding authority. They negotiate. They beg. They are expelled, bound, sent into pigs, driven to Egypt, commanded out in the name that they themselves cry out in recognition when they first sense its approach. They know the name before it is spoken. That is perhaps the most telling detail in all of the exorcism accounts. The demons of the gospel narratives do not have to be convinced of who Jesus is. They know, with a certainty that the human witnesses often lack, that they are in the presence of something that exceeds their power absolutely. They do not doubt. They do not debate. They cry out in fear, they negotiate for terms, they beg for delay, and in the end they obey. The shadow realm has its princes and its wandering spirits and its territorial claims and its ancient corruptions. But it has no answer to the name that these encounters return to, again and again, in the terrified cries of beings who have been roaming the dry places of the world since the floodwaters receded and who have not, in all that time, encountered anything they feared more than this. The night moves deeper, and the account is not yet finished. The shadows grow longer. The creatures of the deep still turn in their darkness. And on the eschatological horizon, the final chapter of this long and extraordinary story is beginning to take shape. We have traveled a long way through the night. We began in the architecture of the heavens, in the throne room where the seraphim burn and the Aphanim turn in their endless gyroscopic orbits of fire, where the divine council assembles and the divine court passes its judgments over the affairs of the cosmos. We descended through the hierarchy of archangels and sentinels, through the transgression of the watchers and the age of giants, through the shadow realm and its territorial princes, through the wilderness encounters and the exorcisms on the dusty roads of Galilee. All of it, every thread we have followed through the length of this extraordinary tradition, has been moving toward the same horizon. Every rebellion, every transgression, every bound angel and wandering spirit and imprisoned watcher in the darkness of Tartarus, every demonic prince contesting the movements of the heavenly host, every beast in the deep and giant in the hill country, has been part of a story that the biblical writers understood to be moving toward a conclusion. That conclusion is the subject of our final act. The apocalyptic literature of the Bible does not begin with revelation. It begins much earlier, in the visions of the prophet Daniel, in a series of night visions that the prophet received in Babylon during the years of exile, visions of such intensity that they left him physically ill, shaken for days, unable to fully recover from what he had seen. The visions of Daniel are the foundation on which the entire apocalyptic tradition of the New Testament is built, and they begin with an image from the same primordial location that has haunted this entire account. The sea. Daniel stands on the shore of a great and churning body of water, wind-driven and restless, and out of it come beasts. 4 of them, in sequence, each one emerging from the same chaotic depths that produced the Leviathan, that the psalmist described as the realm of Rahab and the Tannin, that the ancient cosmology associated with primordial disorder and the forces that opposed the divine ordering of creation. The first beast rises like a lion, but it has wings, the wings of an eagle. As Daniel watches, the wings are torn off, and the beast is lifted from the ground and made to stand on 2 legs like a human, and a human heart is given to it. The image is of something that begins as a creature of terrifying power and predatory speed and is then, somehow, humanized, its wildness constrained into an upright form. The second beast is like a bear, raised up on one side, with 3 ribs in its teeth, and it is given a command, "Get up and eat your fill of flesh." The third beast is like a leopard, but with 4 wings on its back and 4 heads, and dominion is given to it. And then the 4th beast. Daniel's description of it reaches for specificity and finds only superlatives. Terrifying and frightening and very powerful. Iron teeth. Bronze claws. It devours and crushes and tramples what is left underfoot. It is unlike any of the beasts that came before it, and it has 10 horns growing from its head. Scholars have offered historical interpretations for these 4 beasts across millennia of commentary, associating them with successive empires, Babylon and Persia and Greece and Rome, the great powers that dominated the ancient Near East in sequence through the centuries of Daniel's historical range. The correspondence is persuasive and serious. But the imagery the prophet reaches for is not the imagery of a political cartoon. It is the imagery of the primordial deep, of creatures rising from the chaos sea, of the same wild and untamable forces that the creation narrative had pushed to the edges of the ordered world, now returning in monstrous composite forms to trample and devour. Daniel's vision of the beasts ends with the Ancient of Days taking his seat on a throne ablaze with fire, wheels of burning flame surrounding him, thousands upon thousands of celestial beings attending before him, and judgment being given in favor of the holy ones. The beasts are stripped of their power. The dominion that had been theirs is taken and given to a figure described as one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven, who is brought before the Ancient of Days and given an everlasting kingdom. It is a vision that moves from the chaos sea to the divine throne in a single sustained arc, from the worst that the primordial disorder can produce to the ultimate settling of the cosmic account. Daniel, physically devastated by what he has seen, preserves it in writing and keeps it in his heart, which is the text's way of saying that he knew he had been shown something he did not yet fully understand. The full elaboration of what Daniel saw would not come for several centuries. When it came through a vision on a small island in the Aegean Sea, received by a man named John, and it became the final book of the Christian Bible. The book of Revelation is, in every sense, the culmination of the supernatural tradition we have been tracing. Everything we have encountered through this long night finds its fullest and most complete expression here. The divine throne room with its living creatures and its burning ones. The 7 who stand before God. The sealed scroll and the heavenly armies. The dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. The abyss and the beings bound within it. The final war. The last accounting. It begins, as Daniel's vision began, with the sea. John sees a beast rising from the water. It has 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on its horns and a blasphemous name on each head. It is like a leopard, but with the feet of a bear and the mouth of a lion. The imagery is drawn directly from Daniel's 4 beasts, but here they are combined into a single entity, as though the 4 successive powers of Daniel's vision have been compressed into one figure that carries within it all of their qualities simultaneously. The dragon, the great red dragon with 7 heads that we have already traced as the explicit identification of the adversary himself, gives this beast his power and his throne and great authority. One of the beast's heads appears to have a fatal wound that has been healed, a detail that the tradition has read as a counterfeit of resurrection, a dark mirror of the central claim of the Christian message. The whole world, the text says, was filled with wonder and followed the beast. Then a second beast appears, this one from the earth rather than the sea, and it is a figure of a different and in some ways more unsettling kind. It has 2 horns like a lamb. The lamb imagery throughout Revelation is reserved for the figure of Christ, the Lamb who was slain. This beast wears the same visual grammar, the same gentle horns, the same suggestion of innocent sacrifice. But when it speaks, the voice that comes out is the voice of a dragon. Form and voice in complete contradiction. The appearance of the Lamb and the speech of the adversary. This second beast exercises the authority of the first, performs great signs, causes fire to come down from heaven, and deceives the people of the earth through the signs it is permitted to perform. It speaks. It compels. It marks. This figure, the false prophet, the beast from the earth, represents the fullest expression of a theme that has run through the entire biblical treatment of the supernatural adversary, the strategy of mimicry. From the serpent in the garden, whose approach to Eve was not through force but through the redirection of true things toward false purposes, through the lying spirits of the prophetic literature, through the python spirit producing accurate prophecy through a corrupted channel, through Beelzebub whose name was a mockery from the beginning, the adversarial strategy is consistently one of imitation, of wearing the form of what is good and speaking with the voice of what is not. The Apostle Paul, writing to the community in Thessalonica, describes the figure he calls the man of lawlessness in terms that extend this portrait further. This being will be revealed, Paul writes, and his coming will be in accordance with how Satan works, with counterfeit power and signs and wonders, with every sort of evil that deceives those who are perishing. The miracles will be real enough to deceive. The signs will be convincing enough to mislead. And the deception will operate most powerfully on those who have, in Paul's phrase, refused to love the truth and so be saved. Counterfeit miracles. Counterfeit resurrection. The lamb's horns and the dragon's voice. The man of lawlessness setting himself up in the temple of God and declaring himself to be God. The adversarial project, as the apocalyptic literature understands it, reaches its fullest expression not in obvious horror but in convincing imitation, in the near-perfect reproduction of the divine pattern with the divine center removed. But Revelation is not only a story of deception and dark power. It is, structurally and deliberately, a story of escalating divine response. And that response begins to manifest in the sequence of judgments that pour out across the earth in the middle chapters of the book, carried by beings of the celestial hierarchy we traced in our opening hours. Among the most extraordinary of these judgments is the one that involves the opening of the abyss. We have encountered the abyss before, in the terrified pleas of the legion demons who begged not to be sent there before the appointed time, in the reference to the angels who sinned being bound in the darkness of Tartarus. The abyss is the deep place, the bottomless pit, the ultimate confinement of the supernatural adversarial forces that the divine order has removed from active operation but not yet permanently disposed of. And in the 9th chapter of Revelation, the time comes for it to be opened. An angel descends from heaven carrying a key to the shaft of the abyss, and he opens it. What rises from it first is not a creature but a substance, smoke, thick and dense, like the smoke from a great furnace, so vast in its quantity that it darkens the sun and the sky. The light of the world is dimmed by what pours out of the opened abyss before any creature has yet emerged from it. And then, out of the smoke, the locusts come. The locusts of Revelation 9 are one of the most sustained and detailed creature descriptions in the entire book, and their description is a catalogue of deliberate, systematic wrongness. They are called locusts, but they are not locusts. Each detail the text provides contradicts the category the name suggests. They are like horses prepared for battle. They have crowns of gold on their heads. Their faces are human faces. They have the hair of women. Their teeth are the teeth of lions. They wear breastplates like iron. Their wings make a sound like the thundering of many horses and chariots rushing into battle. And their tails are like scorpions, with stingers, and with those tails they have the power to torment people for 5 months. 5 months. Not to kill. The text is specific. They are given power to torment but not to kill. The torment they inflict is compared to the sting of a scorpion when it strikes a person. And during those 5 months, the text says with the grim precision that characterizes Revelation at its most devastating, people will seek death and will not find it. They will long to die, but death will elude them. The king over these creatures is the angel of the abyss, and his name is given in both Hebrew and Greek, Abaddon in Hebrew, Apollyon in Greek. Both words mean the same thing, the destroyer. That name, which we have traced across the biblical tradition from the destroying angel of Egypt to the angel who struck down the Assyrian army in a single night, here finds its fullest embodiment. The destroyer, the ruler of the bottomless pit, the sovereign of the locusts, emerging now from the abyss as the appointed time unfolds. The locust creatures are chimeras, composites, beings assembled from parts that do not belong together, that violate the categories of the natural order in every detail. They are the apocalyptic equivalent of the four beasts of Daniel, chaos creatures, things that rise from the disordered deep wearing the wrong combination of features, assembled from the vocabulary of the natural world into configurations that the natural world was never designed to produce. But even the locusts are a prelude to what follows. Elsewhere in the abyss, bound at the great river Euphrates, for angels wait. Not the wandering spirits of the dry wilderness. Not the locust creatures of the pit. For specific angels, bound at a specific location, held there for a purpose that has been calendared to the minute. They are held ready for a specific hour, a specific day, a specific month, a specific year. The confinement of these beings has been timed with a precision that makes the calendar feel like a weapon, that suggests the entire sweep of human history has been, among other things, a countdown to this particular moment of release. When they are released, they lead a cavalry. John gives the number with a specificity that has startled readers since he wrote it down: 200 million. 200 million mounted warriors, a force of such incomprehensible scale that no landscape could contain it, no military strategy could account for it, no human civilization could survive its passage. And the horses of this cavalry are, like the locust creatures, assembled from wrong combinations. Their heads are like the heads of lions. From their mouths come fire and smoke and sulfur, the three plagues by which a third of humanity is killed. And their tails are like serpents, with heads, and with those heads they cause additional harm. Fire and smoke and sulfur from the front. Serpent heads from behind. The cavalry attacks in both directions simultaneously, forward and backward, in every direction at once, like the Nephilim that move without turning, like the cherubim that face all four directions simultaneously. The apocalyptic creatures of Revelation move with a kind of omnidirectionality that echoes the celestial beings of Ezekiel's vision, as though the deepest patterns of the heavenly order find their dark inversions in the deepest patterns of the apocalyptic destruction. Through all of this, through the trumpets and the bowls and the beasts and the cavalry beyond counting, there falls from the sky a star. It falls with the specificity of an object in motion, with a trajectory and a destination. It is called wormwood. It falls into the fresh waters of the earth, into the rivers and the springs, and it turns them bitter. Not merely unpleasant. The text says the waters become bitter enough to kill, that many people die from them. Wormwood. The name in Greek is absinthus, the plant from which the intensely bitter liquor absinthe would eventually be distilled, a plant whose bitterness was proverbial in the ancient world. Whether this falling star is an angel, a cosmic object, a supernatural entity in some other form, the text does not fully clarify. It gives it a name and describes its effect. It is a poisoning from above, a celestial contamination of the most essential resource the earth sustains life with. The waters that sustained the world now carry death. And then, before the final movement, there is a pause. Revelation describes a period of 1,000 years, the millennium, in which the adversary is bound in the abyss, sealed there, temporarily removed from his operation in the world while the reign of the saints is established on the earth. The dragon, the ancient serpent, the devil and Satan, is seized by an angel carrying the key to the abyss and a great chain, bound and thrown into the pit, locked and sealed over him. For 1,000 years. But the text is careful to add the detail that defines the entire eschatological tension of this moment. After the 1,000 years, he must be released for a little while. Must. It is not presented as a possibility or a contingency. It is presented as a necessity built into the structure of the final events. The releasing is part of the plan. And when the 1,000 years end, the releasing happens. He comes out of the abyss and immediately, with a speed that carries in it all the compressed energy of 1,000 years of confinement, he goes out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth. The deception is his first act. Before any army is assembled, before any battle is joined, the strategy is the same one it has always been: deception. The lamb's horns and the dragon's voice. The counterfeit and the mimicry and the redirection of true things toward false purposes. The nations he gathers are called Gog and Magog, names that appear earlier in the prophetic tradition in Ezekiel, associated there with a great northern power that would come against Israel in the latter days. Here in Revelation they are not a specific nation but a description of totality, the nations from the four corners of the earth, every people and power that the long work of deception has prepared for this final marshalling. Their number is like the sand on the seashore. It is the same image used in the Hebrew Bible for the promises of blessing made to Abraham, his descendants as numerous as the sand. Here it describes the enemy host, the final gathering of everything in the created order that has aligned itself against the divine purpose, assembled for the last time under the authority of the being who has been working toward this moment since before the flood, since before the Nephilim, since before the watchers descended to the mountaintop at Hermon and swore their oath together. They march across the breadth of the earth. They surround the camp of God's people, the city that the text holds as the focal point of the divine presence on earth. The siege is total. The encirclement is complete. It is, in scale and in symbolic weight, the final expression of every opposition that the entire biblical tradition has been tracing since the first serpent moved through the first garden. And fire comes down from heaven and devours them. Not a battle. Not a prolonged engagement between matched forces. Not the 21 days of supernatural warfare that delayed the heavenly messenger in Daniel's account. Fire from heaven, and it is finished. The adversary who deceived them is thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet have already been thrown. And the text adds a detail whose simplicity is its devastation. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. The story that began with a being of extraordinary brilliance deciding that his own light was sufficient, that a higher throne was available to those willing to reach for it, ends here. The day star, the son of the dawn, who swept a third of the stars from the sky with his tail and whose deceptions filled the long centuries of human history with the wandering spirits of his offspring and the territorial claims of his princes and the counterfeit miracles of his final representative, is in the lake of fire. The abyss is no longer relevant because there is nothing left that needs to be confined in it. The Leviathan's great sword has fallen. The Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece and all the princes of all the nations have faced the judgment of the court that was always assembling for this purpose. The watchers in their chains of darkness in Tartarus have faced the reckoning that was always coming for them. The disembodied spirits of the drowned Nephilim have wandered through their last dry wilderness. What the book of Revelation describes in its final chapters, after the fire and the judgment and the casting into the lake, is something that brings the entire arc of the tradition to a resolution that mirrors its beginning with a precision that feels architectural. John sees a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth have passed away, and the sea is no longer there. The sea, the primordial chaos. The Tehom, the deep, from which the Tannin swam and the Leviathan coiled and Daniel's four beasts rose in their terrifying sequence. The sea that was there before the ordering of creation, that was pushed to the edges of the world but never fully eliminated, that kept returning as the source and symbol of everything that resisted the divine order, is gone. Not subdued. Not contained. Gone. The chaos has been resolved at its root, not merely managed at its surface. And in its place, descending from heaven like a bride adorned for her husband, is the city, the New Jerusalem. The presence of God among his people, no longer mediated through the wings of cherubim on the mercy seat, no longer glimpsed through visions that leave prophets face down on the ground, no longer contested by territorial princes fighting 3-week battles in invisible dimensions, but immediate and total and unobstructed. No temple in the city, the text says, because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. No sun and no moon, because the glory of God gives it light. No night there. Nothing impure entering it. Nothing that causes shame. Nothing that practices deception. The deception that was the adversary's first and most persistent strategy, the lie in the garden and the mimicry and the counterfeit and the lamb's horns worn over the dragon's voice, finds in this city its absolute negation. Nothing that deceives enters here. The strategy that shaped the entire biblical supernatural story, from the subtle serpent to the false prophet performing signs and wonders, has no purchase in the new creation. The river of the water of life flows through it, clear as crystal. The tree of life grows beside it, bearing fruit, its leaves for the healing of the nations. That tree, the one guarded by the cherubim and the flaming sword since the 3rd chapter of Genesis, the tree from which humanity was barred at the beginning of the story, is here at the end of it. Accessible, bearing fruit. Its leaves bringing healing to the nations that were scattered and deceived and fought over and contested by the princes of the shadow realm for the entire length of the biblical account. The cherubim whose wings stretched over the mercy seat are still present in the new creation, in the living creatures around the throne. The seraphim still cry their thunder. The 7 still stand before God. The architecture of the heavens is not dissolved but fulfilled, not abandoned but completed, its structure revealed at last in its full and original purpose, no longer framing a conflict but housing a presence that now fills everything. This is the tradition in its fullness. Not the gentle imagery of halos and chubby infants, not the simple binary of good versus evil resolved by straightforward force, but something vast and layered and ancient and strange, a story that encompasses burning wheels and fire-breathing sea monsters and wrestling angels and princes of nations and disembodied giants and the destroyer with his key and the dragon with his dragon's voice speaking through the lamb's horns on the final field. It is a story that has been moving, from its first verse to its last, toward this, the sea gone, the tree accessible, the deception ended, the presence immediate. You have traveled the whole length of it tonight. From the first burning ones crying holy in the throne room, through the long strange middle of the world, all the way to the fire from heaven and the city descending and the leaves of the tree laid against the wounds of a world that needed, more than anything else it ever needed, to be healed. Let the images settle now. Let the wheels turn in their quietness. Let the deep hold its ancient stillness. Let the long story breathe in the night around you. You have heard it all the way to its end. And the end, when it finally comes, is not darkness. It is light. Unobstructed, uncontested, unending light. Rest now.